Hey, everyone! If you enjoy my quantum audiobooks, you can support me by becoming a Patreon member. Your support helps me keep creating, and you'll get exclusive perks. You can also access my audiobooks directly through Google Drive. Check out the link in the description. Now, let's get started.
But since he had nothing of value to offer, he paid no attention to the trainer's gazes and simply spoke casually. I want to go see those elves. If there are any usable elves, that would be a good thing for me. Even if Jiang Ming is quite strong, he might not be able to handle so many people on his own. Hu Ting stared nervously at Jiang Ming, wondering what Jiang Ming was thinking, but dared not leave easily. After all, he's one of Jiang Ming's teammates. Although Hu Ting might not be entirely trustworthy, it would be quite troublesome for Jiang Ming if he didn't have him. The reason we haven't taken action against him yet is because we haven't found a solution to his calendar problem. If he has anything good, then we really need to worry about whether these trainers will try to steal it from him. He doesn't need to fit in at this time. After all, although no one said it, everyone knew that he was the only trainer who had gotten the golden egg without any problems. Jiang Ming, who had no intention of fitting in, hesitated for a moment before finally coming to Hu Ting's side. Considering the potential safety issues, Jiang Ming was extremely wary of this group of trainers. Zhang Tian, who didn't have much in his hands to begin with, didn't care at all about the trainers' gazes. Then the voices of several trainers were heard. The trainers who failed to grab anything seemed to realize something in a daze, and one by one, they sadly and silently began to move in the direction Zhang Tian had indicated. To avoid being overwhelmed, Jiang Ming brought up the fact that he had secretly taken the golden egg away and casually asked Hu Ting where he needed to rest. No one knows whether these trainers will suddenly attack him while he is resting. I heard that there is a group of genius trainers on this island who have developed Pokémon that are comparable to legendary Pokémon. It is said that because those Pokémon were developed in a special way, they are unwilling to be used. Given all these problems, the trainers are bound to get separated. After all, every trainer hopes to improve, and Hotten is no exception. He then turned around and decided to go back to where he had left his luggage. The trainers around him, still grieving, noticed Zhang Tian's movements and immediately looked at him seriously. Don't forget our luggage and tent are still there. However, this vigilance did not last long. Just as Jiang Ming was considering whether to go back with these trainers and try to appear more sociable, a loud rumble suddenly came from not far away. When Jiang Ming asked her a question, Mistine glanced at the trainers launching an attack not far away and at the onyx that was now furiously attacking the trainers. Point 0. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to come here and take such a risk. A moment later, Hotting took out his map and pointed to the center of the island without hesitation. Jiang Ming no longer needs to worry. It seems they won't have any more problems later. Jiang Ming hesitated for a moment after sensing their movements, not really wanting to be with them. Now that things are already dangerous, we should choose the option that is most advantageous to us. Not wanting to make a fool of himself, Zhang Tian hesitated and glanced at the surrounding scene. Because he knew perfectly well that if he and his teammates went together, they would neither solve the problem nor obtain anything. Jiang Ming could tell that Hu Ting was looking forward to improvement, but when he heard what Hu Ting said, Jiang Ming couldn't help but lower his head and think about it for a moment. At this point, Hu Ting hesitated for a moment, then let out an awkward laugh under Jiang Ming's calm gaze before speaking to Jiang Ming without hesitation. He desperately needs a strong teammate to help him right now. Jiang Ming happened to be the teammate who was powerful and had 2 high-level Pokémon with him. If he could win over this teammate, it would be an excellent benefit for him. Just as Hu Ting was feeling flustered, Jiang Ming glanced at Hu Ting's situation and could naturally tell what he was thinking. Has Jiang Ming reached the point where he can kill without leaving a trace? Hu Ting looked at Jiang Ming with a confused expression, not quite understanding what was going on. A group of people cautiously began to move forward. However, just as they were heading towards the center, 10 groups of trainers who had been fighting fiercely with the giant snake suddenly jumped out. Actually, their initial target was Jiang Ming because they could tell that Jiang Ming was being courted by Hu Ting. One sentence was enough to make Hotten behave like a quail, unlike the other trainers who dared not criticize Jiang Ming's actions in any way. Unexpectedly, Jiang Ming actually agreed. Huo Ting's eyes lit up. Without saying a word, he excitedly put away his map and then called his teammates to head towards the center. Not wanting to miss a thing, Huo Ting kept his eyes on Jiang Ming while also observing his surroundings. The teammates who came with Huo Ting seemed to share the same goal. Seeing that Jiang Ming was willing to help them, they were extremely happy and followed Jiang Ming closely. Having probably determined that Huo Ting didn't really want to bring their group of trainers, he immediately turned his attention to Jiang Ming. However, it wouldn't be a good thing if he openly showed his unwillingness, since these trainers only said nice things on the surface. The trainers' expressions twisted in horror, seemingly surprised that Jiang Ming would do such a thing. This kind of terrifying big shot made him somewhat hesitant to approach. Nobody knows what these trainers will do after they make a refusal. Could you give us a ride? Jiang Ming, who had no intention of wasting any time, didn't want him to make wild guesses, so he casually pulled him. Just as Hotting was getting serious about the conditions these trainers were proposing, those trainers who were waiting for Hotting's response had clearly lost interest in waiting any longer. He didn't want to miss this golden opportunity. After a while, Jiang Ming nodded to Hu Jiang. Their team already has quite a few people, so adding another team would be a real challenge for them to manage. Hotting was naturally unwilling. Although it was said that there were indeed quite a few research topics there, who knew exactly how many? If problems arise due to unequal distribution of spoils, it would be too much of a loss for him. Then one of them smiled and spoke directly to Huo Ting in front of him. They thought that because their direction was different from other trainers, they wouldn't encounter any obstacles. They were followed by a Ghastly, and Ghastly has a 95% chance of producing poison gas. The group of trainers who jumped out had clearly heard what Hotting had just said. That would be too terrifying. As Jiang Ming and Huo Ting headed towards the central area, the group of trainers immediately began to stare intently at Jiang Ming. This is enough to prove that Jiang Ming's abilities can help them solve some problems. However, this unexpected expression did not last long. A moment later, a group of trainers suddenly froze and fell to the ground. A group of people who didn't take Huo Ting and the other trainers seriously at all quickly identified their new target and went straight to Jiang Ming to poach him. As long as Jiang Ming is with them, they can safely obtain some things. As for Hotting and the other trainers, they are not so important. Huo Ting, who was being pulled back, was terrified. Just as she was about to struggle, she heard Jiang Ming speak seriously. As they finished their movements, Jiang Ming suddenly took a step back. Having confirmed that Zhai Ting and the other trainers dared not resist in any way, Jiang Ming smiled with satisfaction and immediately took out the antidote from his backpack. Although he was not a companion to the group of trainers who were lying on the ground. But they are trainers who were on the island together. If he rescues these people, he can use them to gain some benefits later. To avoid creating another enemy, Jiang Ming decisively used his most effective antidote on the trainers. The trainers who had fallen to the ground slowly recovered as Jiang Ming performed these actions. Now that they had come to this small island, they couldn't have come without any preparation. The group of 22 trainees who had recovered quickly took out their backpacks and began to treat themselves. Jiang Ming smiled with satisfaction, having confirmed that they weren't a bunch of idiots, and decided not to waste any more time there. Just as these people began to treat their bodies, Jiang Ming led a group of people and immediately ran towards the place where he had found Ghastly. Jiang Ming had assumed that Ghastly had already poisoned the trainers and would suddenly jump out and attack them. So when he ran over, Jiang Ming's eyes were extremely wary. To Jiang Ming's slight surprise, Ghastly did not jump out under his wary gaze. The elf, on the contrary, cautiously tried to escape. Unfortunately, because the escape attempt was a bit too stealthy, Jiang Ming quickly caught up with the Pokémon that was trying to run away. Because he was worried that Ghastly behind him would affect him, Jiang Ming, upon noticing Ghastly's situation, immediately ran towards Ghastly and retrieved his Poké Ball. Ghastly clearly didn't expect Jiang Ming to take out a Poké Ball at this moment. Seeing that Jiang Ming was not going to let it go, it hurriedly ran around in a panic. Compared to Ghastly's panic, Jiang Ming was much calmer, and he began to arrange for his Pokémon to head towards Ghastly. Huo Ting, seeing Jiang Ming's actions, spoke to him with a somewhat serious expression. Our focus now is on the test subjects in the central area, so let's just leave it at that. For him, a Ghastly wasn't a particularly important Pokémon. The central government mentioned in the text that for 13,336 heads, see exciting novels on Feilu Novel Network. Jiang Ming knew it wasn't necessary, so he didn't necessarily want to take down Ghastly this time. He already has a lot of Pokémon, so it wouldn't matter if he didn't have a Ghastly. However, he must first determine how much Ghastly will affect them. Even though Hotting suggested forgetting it, Jiang Ming still forcefully arranged for Lucario to head towards Ghastly. Under Jiang Ming's arrangement, Lucario quickly caught up with Ghastly. However, Ghastly is a gas, so it is not easy to come into contact with Ghastly using ordinary methods. This resulted in Lucario making contact with Ghastly, but the battle between the two was not going well. Ghastly can't hurt Lucario, but Lucario can't hurt Ghastly with a 930 attack. Just as Hotting was getting impatient, thinking that continuing like this would be pointless for both sides, Jiang Ming, having confirmed that Ghastly couldn't harm Lucario and wasn't particularly strong, breathed a sigh of relief and called out to Lucario, "Come back." Lucario, who usually cares a lot about his strength, hesitated and seemed reluctant. However, Jiang Ming's focus was not on Ghastly, and seeing that Lucario was not willing, he could only speak to Lucario with a bit of helplessness. "We have more important things to do." Fortunately, Lucario is clearly a Pokémon that prioritizes the bigger picture. Lucario, who was not very willing after hearing Jiang Ming's words, could only retreat quickly in a huff. The trainers who were rescued by Jiang Ming's antidote clearly realized Ghastly's special nature during Jiang Ming's analysis. They weakly got up from the ground, looked at Huo Ting with mixed feelings and nodded firmly to Huo Ting. If even one person is poisoned, they will inform everyone as soon as possible. This unique identity, coupled with their status as residents of Ghastly Island, made them acutely aware that if they needed a Pokémon to guide them in finding what was beneficial to them, Ghastly would be the perfect Pokémon to lead them. To their surprise, just as they were staring at each other, Jiang Ming arrived in a hurry with a group of trainers. Under Jiang Ming's arrangement, many trainers began to search the surrounding area one after another. Jiang Ming was speechless as he looked at the group of trainers, never expecting to witness their disarray after arriving here. Among the victims were trainers from Jiang Ming's team, and others were trainers who had broken away and were traveling alone. Therefore, they maintained basic communication during the search. As soon as he left, Jiang Ming began to arrange for all the trainers to split up and act separately. The group of trainers, witnessing this embarrassing scene, closed their eyes in embarrassment. Amidst the group's resolute attitude, Hotting, who had initially thought it was just a Ghastly, began to look serious. The trainers who were searching for Ghastly knew that even a single Ghastly could poison them, but he had never been on this island before. After all, they are their companions. If these trainers are left here to die, there will be no one to help them if they run into problems later. He didn't believe that Jiang Ming had just said those words casually, but Ghastly is a different story. With so many victims, it seems this Ghastly's methods are quite unusual. As a trainer who has only recently arrived on the island, he might know something about the place. Since Jiang Ming has already spoken, it proves that he has ideas. Sure enough, under his gaze, Jiang Ming spoke without hesitation. If it were a normal Ghastly, we wouldn't be in such a sorry state. Without further ado, he immediately began administering antidotes to the trainers and started treating them. This method proved quite useful. After Jiang Ming had the group use this method for over 10 minutes, they learned of Ghastly's whereabouts from a poisoned trainer. Ghastly, having stayed on the island all this time, must know it very well. Having already guessed that Hotting couldn't possibly know everything about the island, Jiang Ming didn't waste any words and led a group of trainers away. Realizing the usefulness of Ghastly, Jiang Ming shook his head without hesitation. Upon arriving there, Jiang Ming saw a group of Ghastly victims. Having finally located Ghastly, Jiang Ming quickly led a group of Pokémon and the trainer directly towards the direction where the trainer was. This means that he knows one thing, but he can't fully control the situation on the island. Because there were so many trainers, the injured trainers sitting together in a group stared at each other. Especially considering Ghastly's unique identity. Huo Ting, who was being questioned, understood almost immediately why Jiang Ming had asked that question. Like Jiang Ming, Huo Ting witnessed the trainer's miserable state and spoke softly with mixed feelings. He then calmly turned his gaze to Jiang Ming. Can you pinpoint the location of those test subjects now? If we really want these people to just wait to die, we should wait until they no longer need them. As part of Hotting's plan, many trainers were gradually rescued by the antidote. After confirming that all the trainers were all right, Jiang Ming, who had been observing the situation from the sidelines, solemnly called out Jenger. The Jenger that was summoned clearly didn't care much about the current situation. After all, while ghastly poisons most people, the poison is not severe. Just one bottle of antidote would be enough to cure these people of their poisoning. Since it's not serious at all, Jenger naturally doesn't need to worry about these things. Jenger, who doesn't care about this matter at all, doesn't even intend to take action. Jiang Ming didn't actually want Jenger to make a move. After all, Jenger was one of his trump cards. If Jenger were to actually make a move, it's highly likely that some skilled and shrewd trainers would spot some weaknesses in his abilities. Although they appear to be helping each other out, many trainers are actually eyeing them from behind the scenes. If they actually discover some loopholes, Jiang Ming's side will still suffer a loss. However, no matter how much he suffered, he couldn't let Ghastly continue like this, because nowadays Ghastly could poison a large number of people as soon as it appeared. If this continues, countless people will surely fall because of Ghastly. This sprite must be captured as soon as possible. To speed things up, Jiang Ming had no choice but to say to Jenger, "You're the most professional at searching for ghost-type Pokémon. You'll probably be handling this next." Jeng tilde Jeng Jeng. Jenger bared its large teeth, showing no intention of refusing Jiang Ming's words. While treating other trainers, Hot-In slowly looked up at Jenger, who hadn't refused, then glanced at Jiang Ming and could only say with a hint of disappointment, "Then I'll have to trouble you with the rest." If he could, he would love to take this Ghastly, which could poison a whole bunch of people the moment it appeared, under his command. After all, this Pokémon is already so special even before it has leveled up, so it's really hard to say what it will be like after it successfully levels up. However, it is certain that this Pokémon's abilities are more unique than those of ordinary ghost-type Pokémon. If he could have such a special Pokémon, he would definitely be able to gain greater and stronger power with it. Unfortunately, he simply doesn't have the ability to find Ghastly right now. We can only watch this opportunity slip away. Dejected at missing his chance, Hotting gradually brought up many trainers, then looked firmly at Jiang Ming. Row 7 *. I'll go with these trainers to check on the other trainers and prevent them from running into that Ghastly and getting poisoned. Upon hearing his words, Jiang Ming almost immediately understood that he was clearly handing over the opportunity to capture Ghastly to him. Jiang Ming was surprised that Huo Ting was so sensible and remained silent for a moment. Point 0. After a while, Jiang Ming smiled and waved to Huo Ting, then turned his gaze to Zhang Tian. Now that Huo Ting has voluntarily withdrawn, Jiang Ming's only competitor this time is Zhang Tian. He was quite curious about what choice Zhang Tian would make. Under Jiang Ming's curious gaze, Zhang Tian calmly looked at Jiang Ming. After a while, he calmed down and looked away, then turned and left with his elf. It's clear that he doesn't want to compete with Jiang Ming. However, compared to Hotting's sincerity, he was clearly not very happy. The reason they didn't steal them was simply because Jenger and Gardevoir were already in Jiang Ming's hands. These two Pokémon were given to Jiang Ming by his parents and are exceptionally powerful. He knew perfectly well that it would be difficult for him to gain any advantage against these two powerful elves, which is why he voluntarily gave up on Guang. Jiang Ming, understanding Zhang Tian's reluctance, looked at Zhang Tian, who ultimately gave up voluntarily, and his expression was still satisfied. Ghastly, suddenly realizing this, was of course not going to obediently stay in place and let Jenger rub it so casually. The repeated pressing of the button made Ghastly realize that no matter where it ran, Jenger could catch it. Ghastly, which hadn't yet managed to harm anyone, was merely excited for a moment before being pinned down by Jenger's claw. By the time that time comes, Ghastly will have already run away completely. Ghastly is, after all, a special Pokémon that can poison a bunch of people just by appearing. Its mind is incredibly sharp, The moment it caught Ghastly, it immediately concealed itself, attempting to. It wasn't until it was completely pinned down that Ghastly realized its ability to dodge in front of Jengar was still a bit too immature. After several unsuccessful attempts to counter it, Ghastly finally got hard this time after being held down. Unfortunately, its poison gas is very useful to the trainers around it, but not so much to Jengar. Even if someone walks into this area, they wouldn't be able to find it. Forced into a corner, Ghastly glared angrily at Jengar ahead, then floated into the air and launched poison gas at Jengar. However, if the Pokémon you're looking for, a Ghost-type Pokémon, is Jengar's 807, then things are different. Just when Ghastly thought it had escaped everyone's pursuit, Jengar swaggered up a tree and found Ghastly floating in midair. Seeing Jengar's grinning expression, Jiang Ming slowly took out his Piquet ball and looked seriously in Jengar's direction. "Give that Ghastly a good beating." Jiang Ming, who had no intention of participating in the battle, smiled as he watched Ghastly, who was clearly no match for Jengar, and gave Jengar a thumbs up with a hint of satisfaction. As a Pokémon with the same abilities, Jengar reacted quickly the moment Ghastly disappeared, and immediately pinned Reese down again after Ghastly had run 10 distances. It would indeed be quite difficult for a regular Pokémon to search for a Ghost-type Pokémon. Satisfied, Jiang Ming immediately directed Jengar to begin searching the surrounding area. At that time, Ghastly firmly believed that since it was gaseous, there would definitely be no problem. Unfortunately, its eagerness did not last long. Compared to Jengar, other Ghost-type Pokémon are no match for it. With its numerous tricks up its sleeve, Jengar swaggered around the area. Ghastly, very proud of its ability to hide, excitedly floated around in circles on the tree, looking like it couldn't wait to go out and wreak havoc. "Well done." Despite this minor impact, Jengar didn't even need to dodge and once again firmly pinned Ghastly in midair to the ground. Jengar, grinning broadly with its large teeth showing, immediately launched an attack towards Ghastly. Unfortunately, this time Ghastly encountered its nemesis, Jengar. Ultimately, Jengar is a Pokémon of a much higher level than Ghastly. While Ghastly's poison gas would be a deadly threat to an ordinary trainer, it would only have a minor effect on Jengar. After all, sometimes these types of sprites can hide secretly and not be detected by the naked eye. This behavior is still very useful for many trainers because trainers can only rely on the naked eye to see. Upon receiving Jiang Ming's words, Jengar proudly raised its chubby body and showed Jiang Ming its big tooth. Ghastly, which was initially trying to escape, probably realized it had to stop fighting. Even if some trainers have special items that allow them to see the form of Ghost-type Pokémon, it still takes some time. Ghastly, which was already almost stiff from being pinned to the ground, never expected that it would be beaten into this state by Jengar even though it had already given up resisting. After being hit several times in a row, Ghastly, whose gas was almost floating away, was probably angry under Jengar's attack. It started to float into the air and curse at Jengar. The Ghost is a 227 card in your hand. Jiang Ming doesn't plan to reveal this trump card until a crucial moment. Jengar, who had been patted, tilted its head and looked at Jiang Ming, seemingly unaware of what Jiang Ming was trying to say. Unfortunately, Jiang Ming hasn't figured out the specifics of this island yet, so he doesn't need Jengar to do anything more for him. Jengar, who beat the Pokémon to this state, didn't seem to realize how terrible his actions were. With a very serious expression, Jiang Ming immediately issued a new command to Jengar: hit him harder. Jengar, who had been grinning just moments before, laughed even harder at Jiang Ming's words. At Jiang Ming's command, Jengar's attacks became even more ferocious. In the end, Ghastly, which had been relentlessly rubbed against the ground, could only lie there listlessly, having even forgotten that it was supposed to float in midair. Thinking about the benefits Ghastly could bring him later, Jiang Ming gripped the Piquet ball tightly and praised Jengar, who was still baring its teeth beside him, with great satisfaction. Ghastly, a Ghastly whose mere appearance can poison most trainers and Pokémon, has truly unique abilities. This was clearly because Jiang Ming's praise had inflated his ego and he wanted to do more for Jiang Ming. Sensing that Ghastly had been completely subdued after being beaten, Jengar proudly waved its chubby paw at Jiang Ming. Feeling the slight vibration coming from inside the Pokeball, Jiang Ming, who had been relatively calm just moments before, couldn't help but show a happy expression on his face. Jiang Ming, who had been watching from the sidelines, looked at Ghastly, which was shouting curses at Jengar with great force but had no idea what it was cursing. His expression became particularly solemn. If he trains it specifically, this Ghastly could become his ultimate weapon. If a trainer did this normally, Ghastly would definitely dodge immediately. Seeing Jengar's slightly stiff expression, Jiang Ming spoke without hesitation. You are a very important trump card for me and you need to appear at crucial moments. It would be a waste of your energy to make a move now. But this time the trainer is clearly different. Jiang Ming, who insisted on making Jengar the mastermind behind the scenes, raised his hand and patted O's Jengar. This trainer can actually command Jengar to beat himself half to death first. A very happy Jengar floated happily beside Jiang Ming, baring its big teeth and starting to point in another direction. Jiang Ming, who had been watching Ghastly for a while, quickly picked up the Pokeball the moment Ghastly entered and settled down. Ghastly, which has no ability to dodge, was unable to resist the attack from the Pokeball and obediently entered the Pokeball. Very good, it seems that the subjugation was successful this time. Jengar, you did a great job this time. Jiang Ming then chuckled softly. Since Huo Ting said there might be more test subjects nearby, why don't we study the nearby test subjects and the situation on this island before making a move? Such praise is clearly very useful for Jengar. This is a devilish trainer. Ghastly, already extremely frustrated by the attacks, was completely defeated by the overwhelming onslaught. Jiang Ming, who had been waiting for this opportunity, had his eyes light up when he saw Jengar's action. Without hesitation, he threw 10 Pokeballs directly at Ghastly. Jiang Ming, understanding Jengar's confusion, stared ahead with a cold face. Jiang Ming understood Jengar's action. It was telling him that the Ghastly was no longer a threat. Ghastly, which was so badly beaten that it was about to vomit, felt completely dizzy and had no ability to dodge. Moreover, being a Ghastly firmly believes that it would be far too easy for it to dodge. He had just caught a Ghastly and now another special Vulpix had appeared. Jiang Ming then looked around and casually mentioned the follow-up plan to Huo Ting. Seeing that Jiang Ming was eager to find out about the nearby experimental subjects, Fu Ting didn't waste any time. He glanced at Ting with a look of surprise, not expecting that while Bai Ding was helping other trainers heal, he would still have the mind to pay attention to the Pokémon around him. The group of trainers, who had no intention of being poisoned, waved their hands repeatedly at Jiang Ming, indicating that they did not need him to show them their Pokémon. Jiang Ming, who clearly felt that he had calmed Jengar down, looked around with a smile. Upon seeing Jiang Ming arrive, Huo Ting excitedly rushed to Jiang Ming's side. What surprised him was that there were indeed experimental subjects running around in this place. It's true that he just told Jengar that he wanted to investigate the surrounding area and see if there were any new test subjects. Although Jiang Ming just said he was going to deal with Ghastly, they weren't sure if he had actually found Ghastly and solved the problem because they hadn't seen him in action. Jiang Ming smiled when Huo Ting intercepted him like this. He had already guessed that these trainers would have this attitude. I've caught Ghastly, but because of its characteristics I might not be able to release it. Jiang Ming's casual remark that Jengar was very important easily appeased Jengar's emotions. However, he did not intend to expose the true nature of these trainers directly. Huo Ting chuckled and stopped Jiang Ming from taking out the Ghastly's Pokeball, smiling as she said to Jiang Ming, "It's good that you caught it, don't do anything else. It's not a big deal." After some time, he took Jengar and headed in the direction where Houghton and the others were. Jiang Ming, who genuinely wanted to learn more about the experimental subjects, was quickly drawn to Huo Ting's words. Li Lai Oha. This meant that Jiang Ming didn't need to spend much time finding the group of trainers. He knew clearly that they had a lot to do after coming to this small island. Therefore, seeing Jiang Ming observing the surroundings, he couldn't help but say to Jiang Ming, "While you were gone, I led the others to search this area, and during the search I discovered a rather special six-tailed beast." Now that he had made the plan, Jiang Ming did not intend to waste any more time. He wanted to investigate the experimental subjects immediately. The other trainers who were found also nervously turned their gazes to Jiang Ming. Jenger, who was initially annoyed that Jiang Ming was unwilling to let him act, became cheerful again after hearing Jiang Ming's words. Although he could tell the trainers' attitudes were clear, Jiang Ming calmly ignored their emotions and put the Poké ball away. How could these trainers really dare to meet Ghastly? They had only met it once before and were immediately poisoned by Ghastly. If we were to meet again now, wouldn't we be doomed? Slightly surprised by the number of experimental subjects in this place, Jiang Ming suppressed his emotions and looked at Huo Ting to begin discussing the situation of the special six-tailed creature. Jiang Ming could clearly sense that these trainers were eagerly awaiting good news from him. He casually took out a Poké ball and looked at the group of trainers in front of him. Considering that Ghastly's appearance had caused them to be poisoned so much, the group of trainers couldn't wait for Jiang Ming's answer. Because many trainers in the vicinity had been poisoned when Jiang Ming arrived there, those trainers were still looking for a place to rest and had not gone too far. Jiang Ming quickly learned about the special characteristics of the six-tailed creature from Huo Ting. In fact, the Vulpix was not much different from other Pokémon in any way, which led Fuden to initially think that it was just an ordinary Pokémon. It wasn't until Hotting's ghost-type Pokémon was burned by Vulpix's flames when it got close to it that the flames stopped. Before being burned by the flames, Hotting's Pokémon had been in hiding and had not appeared in front of Vulpix. But the flames of the six-tailed fox seemed to have eyes, and it easily discovered that a ghost-type Pokémon had hidden itself and was sneaking around. Because Vulpix's behavior was so unusual, Hotton quickly recalled his ghost-type Pokémon and along with other trainers used ghost-type Pokémon to follow Vulpix's lead. Experiment 790 proved that Vulpix's flames can counter ghost-type Pokémon. All ghost-type Pokémon concealed themselves when they appeared in front of Vulpix, making it impossible to discern their location without special methods. Vulpix clearly hadn't seen the location of those ghost-type Pokémon either, but its flames automatically found them and burned them out one by one. Thinking of the situation with the six tails, Huo Ting clenched his fists and looked at Jiang Ming excitedly. What we fear most when we encounter ghost-type Pokémon is that these Pokémon can hide their forms. If we can capture this Vulpix, we won't have to worry about those problems when facing our own spirit-type Pokémon. Jiang Ming could understand Huo Ting's excitement. Looking at the elated trainer in front of him, he knew that what Huo Ting said was indeed quite right. Knowing this, Jiang Ming did not ask him to stop his excited emotions at this time. Instead, he thoughtfully inquired about some information about the six-tailed fox and its location. During the inquiry, Jiang Ming and Huo Ting also headed towards the location of the six-tailed fox. After a while, Jiang Ming saw six-tailed fox hiding in the grass. Vulpix was clearly very wary of everything around it, so the trainers hiding here trying to capture Vulpix couldn't easily get close to the Pokémon. When Huo Ting and Jiang Ming arrived, Zhang Tian was still keeping an eye on the situation of Liyue. CCCG. Seeing Jiang Ming arrive, Zhang Tian was still a little wary of him. After all, although Jiang Ming's strength was not particularly great, he had a powerful Pokémon by his side as a protector. His Pokémon couldn't beat Jiang Ming's Pokémon. If Jiang Ming stayed there, it was very likely that Jiang Ming would steal the Pokémon he had his eye on. Thinking of the Ghastly that could poison everyone just by appearing, Zhang Tian's wariness of Jiang Ming grew stronger. Jiang Ming, who could clearly sense Zhang Tian's wariness, glanced at Zhang Tian speechlessly. He then calmly said, "I don't fight for every Pokémon. This Vulpix is indeed very good, but I am also a conscientious trainer. Since we are partners, I should always give you some of the good things." This statement directly indicates that Jiang Ming has no intention of seizing the six-tail's layers. Zhang Tian, who was worried about Jiang Ming, breathed a sigh of relief, as did Huo Ting. He admitted that Jiang Ming was indeed very capable, and because of this capability, he really couldn't compete with Jiang Ming in a serious contest. However, watching Jiang Ming acquire so many special Pokémon was heartbreaking for him, since it was information he had discovered and information he had tried his best to bring Jiang Ming into the game. He would be heartbroken if after all the hard work he gained nothing and Jiang Ming reaped all the benefits. Just as Jiang Ming was thinking, Zhang Tian and Huo Ting, who could clearly understand what Jiang Ming was saying, exchanged glances. In no time, the flames on Sixdale's body charged directly towards Ghastly. Under Jiang Ming's command, Ghastly headed towards the Vulpix, obediently following Jiang Ming's instructions. The captured Ghastly probably knew that it could only become Jiang Ming's Pokémon, so it obeyed. The others couldn't possibly be unaware of the connection between Vulpix's ability and Ghastly's situation, but upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, they too fell silent. Anyway, they're not a team that always works together, so starting a conflict at this time wouldn't do him any good. However, besides Ghost-type Pokémon, they also have other types of Pokémon. Of course, Jiang Ming just said that casually. Judging from the Vulpix's abilities, Jiang Ming did not see any mutual restraint. He only saw that Ghastly was likely to be completely countered by Vulpix. Fortunately, he no longer needs to feel heartbroken because he has no conflict with Jiang Ming. The two trainers then wore wry smiles with Houghton speaking first. Jiang Ming could see the confusion in the two people, and he didn't intend to keep them in suspense, so he spoke up crisply when they looked at him with puzzled expressions. Jiang Ming, who was initially curious, instantly understood upon hearing this. Vulpix was specifically used to track ghost-type Pokémon. Jiang Ming, who could clearly sense that a group of people in the team were quite cunning, curled his lips speechlessly. However, I don't intend to get into a conflict with them at this time. Seeing that neither side seemed willing to approach, Jiang Ming pondered for a moment, then asked with a hint of curiosity, why not let the other Pokémon give it a try? Flames ignited on the Sixdale's body as soon as it approached. Unfortunately, due to the characteristics of the Sixdales, the two sides could not come up with a good solution. Jiang Ming had previously learned from Chuang Ting that Ghost-type Pokémon would encounter problems if they got close to Vulpix, so it would indeed be a bit difficult to use a Ghost-type Pokémon to sneak up on Vulpix. Jiang Ming, who was watching Ghastly's movements, observed his surroundings and began to pay attention to Ghastly's current situation. It is precisely because of this lack of discrimination that the Sixdale's strength is even more unique. Jiang Ming, who had no interest in starting a conflict, hesitated for a moment before taking out the piquet ball from his hand. However, before the truth comes out, Jiang Ming doesn't like to reveal his guesses, so even if he figures it out, he doesn't intend to show it. There was no intention to show it. 0. Since Ghost-type Pokémon are difficult to use, why not use other Pokémon? It has to be said that their team is truly cunning with just a few people. Since other ordinary Pokémon can't get close to that Vulpix, I'll send Ghastly to try. The abilities of the Sixdales are almost identical. With Jiang Ming's attention focused on him, Wei Si quickly approached Liu Wei. Jiang Ming chuckled, clearly understanding his situation but choosing not to show it. He then sent his Ghastly out to command it to approach the Vulpix. But because of this special situation, Houghton didn't dare to explain everything too clearly for fear that he might have ulterior motives. Ghast, like Vulpix, is one of the experimental subjects you mentioned. That proves that these two Pokémon have unique abilities. What if these two Pokémon are mutually effective against each other? Besides Ghost-type Pokémon, Vulpix can actually automatically track other types of Pokémon. Understanding that Jiang Ming was deliberately trying to create a harmonious atmosphere within the group, Fu Ting gave Jiang Ming a grateful look and then began to discuss with Zhang Tian how to capture Liu Wei. Fu Ting and Zhang Tian, who were discussing something, looked at Jiang Ming with confusion, not quite understanding the meaning of Jiang Ming sending Ghastly to make contact. Therefore, Jiang Ming is more inclined to believe that this elf does not possess this ability. Vulpix is alert when it sees Ghastly appear. He simply observed the actions of Hu Ting and Zhang Tian for a while before turning to the Jengar next to him. Zhang Tian and Hu Ting watched in silence as Ghastly disappeared and Vulpix lay on the ground in front of them. Ghastly didn't panic for long. Upon seeing Jiang Ming's piquet ball, it excitedly ran straight into the piquet ball as if it had seen a savior. I want to wait until the time comes to let you test it out and see if the Sixdale's flames will harm you. While Jiang Ming was observing with this thought in mind, the two trainers who were fighting for ownership of the Vulpix finally decided their battle. Although Zhang Tian was quite capable, Hu Ting had a large group of helpers on his side. Jiang Ming, who had this tendency, did not intend to state his inclination directly. He only intended to observe the situation of Liu Wei under the guise of his suspicion. However, after the initial confusion, Jengar clearly became very obedient. The power of the six tails that they are seeing now at 1.2 is probably all there is to it, and it hasn't been exaggerated to any extreme. Based on the results of the current experiments, the six tails and X are mutually restraining. I'm curious whether you, who are much stronger and higher level than the six tails, will be affected by those flames. The wary Vulpix couldn't run far under Ghastly's poison gas attack. It only took a few steps before slowly collapsing due to the gas attack. After watching an unbelievable battle, Jiang Ming paused for a moment, then quickly took out his piquet ball. As Six Tails fell, its flames expanded and suddenly charged towards Ghastly, slamming directly into Ghastly's body. After a while, the two rushed towards the direction of the Six Tails, clearly intending to compete for first place. It casually nodded directly at Jiang Ming without refusing his request. Jiang Ming, who was not really keen on trying, picked up his piquet ball, intending to recall Ghastly at this moment. However, Ghastly, which had been attacked by flames, suddenly swelled up as if it were angry. Jengar, who had been happy because of Jiang Ming's praise, looked at Jiang Ming with some suspicion after hearing his words. Ghastly is his own Pokémon now, so it would be a huge loss for him if something happened to it. Jiang Ming, who could tell that Jengar had no intention of refusing the request, breathed a sigh of relief, patted Jengar, and then spoke thoughtfully. Then Jiang Ming saw the swollen-up demon, Sankey-san, rushing angrily toward the six-tailed demon. Suddenly scorched by the flames, Ghastly cried out in alarm and excitedly turned its head to float towards Jiang Ming. However, given that this Pokémon possesses such formidable power, why didn't the researchers who bred it take it away with them? Before long, Ghastly, who had been a savior, disappeared from everyone's sight. After Vulpix let out a cry and began to dodge, Ghastly slowly floated beside Vulpix and launched a poison gas attack. When Jiang Ming saw how easily the flames on Vulpix found Ghastly, he had already given up on trying any further. If even a Jengar of this caliber can be affected by Vulpix's flames, then Vulpix is truly a god. For this Pokémon that could help them become even stronger in the future, the two trainers moved very quickly, using all their strength. Unfortunately, this retreat didn't seem to be of much use to Ghastly. Hotting was the ultimate winner. Ghastly, who was initially pleased with itself for bringing down Vulpix with its poison, never imagined that while Vulpix had fallen, the flames on its body had not. If they can snatch the Vulpix, they can have a powerful Pokémon. The wary Six Tails let out a cry. Jiang Ming stood quietly behind the two trainers just as he had told them earlier. He did not intend to get involved in the matter. Having confirmed that Huting hadn't overlooked anything, Jiang Ming said no more and quickly began directing Jengar to launch the first wave of attacks against Vulpix. When Jiang Ming first told Huting that he wanted Vulpix and Jengar to compete, he didn't reveal all his guesses directly. He only expressed his idea of having Jengar and Vulpix compete. Huting's eyes widened in disbelief. He hadn't expected the flames to disappear so suddenly. He glanced at Jiang Ming cautiously. "We are partners, and I am not so heartless as to harm my partners." Seeing that Fu Ting was serious because of his action and expression, Jiang Ming finally smiled and spoke. Without arguing, Hotting obediently released the Six Tails. Just then, Jiang Ming walked over with Jengar. Jiang Ming, who had some reservations about Huting's situation, calmly observed Huting's state. Seeing that Huting's attitude had softened further because of his comfort, he then asked Huting to release the six-tailed fox. Seeing that the trainer in front of him was clearly trying to find out more, Jiang Ming was not really willing to say some things. He casually nodded to Jiang Ming, indicating that he was aware of the Six Tails situation and would conduct training thereafter. "Have you already figured out what's wrong with this elf?" After all, it didn't mean much to him. After all, it was clear that Jiang Ming's large group of helpers couldn't solve the problem with his elf. Seeing that Vulpix was resistant to most trainers, Jiang Ming glanced at Fortin's condition, and while directing Jengar to rush towards Vulpix, couldn't help but say to the trainer, "I don't think Vulpix is in a good state for a duel right now." Futing clearly didn't care about Zhang Tian's attitude. Huting, who had initially thought Jiang Ming was there to steal the elf, was stunned for a moment before finally realizing what was going on. He didn't need to fear Zhang Tian because he had a lot of helpers around him, but he needed to worry about Jiang Ming. At that moment, the flames on Vulpix's body rushed towards Jengar. Just when Jiang Ming thought that the flames on Vulpix could actually work on Jengar, the flames suddenly stopped midway. This meant that Feuding had no idea what Jiang Ming's speculations were about Liyue. It was clear that Huo Ting was speechless at Jiang Lu's wariness, but he didn't intend to say anything more at this moment and simply pushed Jengar out. Zhang Tian, who was being restrained by a large group of helpers, looked extremely displeased as he watched Huo Ting take down the Six Tails. He finally obtained a powerful Pokémon and an excited expression appeared on his face. As soon as it appeared, Vulpix looked at Jiang Ming warily, clearly disliking this group of trainers who had appeared out of nowhere. Moreover, Jiang Ming did not actually have such a criminal record before. Huo Ting was stunned for a moment when he saw Jiang Ming suddenly appear and panicked for a second. Seeing that Huo Ting had finally realized what was happening, Jiang Ming sighed and stopped talking nonsense. While talking about his experimental plan, he said a slightly helpless word of comfort to the door. Because he has no prior criminal record, Huo Ting is more concerned about whether Zhang Dui will try to find other ways to get things from Huo He than about him. It wasn't until seeing the current state of the Six Tails that Huo Ting began to have doubts. I want to use Jengar to test the strength of the Vulpix you have. Huo Ting wasn't a brainless person. Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, he instantly understood that Shai Jin was reminding him that Fei wasn't very obedient these days. Then it began to disappear as if it couldn't find its way. Jiang Ming certainly knew why Fu Ding was so worldly. Although they are currently cooperating, they could very well become enemies in the future. Revealing these things would ultimately cause him considerable trouble. However, seeing Huo Ting's uneasy expression because of this matter, Jiang Ming, who originally didn't intend to let Huo Ting know about Liyue's characteristics, thought about it for a moment and finally took a kind look at Huo Ting. I don't see anything wrong. I just think that if the Six Tails power is really that strong, why is it left on this island? Huo Ting looked at Jiang Ming in a daze, not quite understanding what Jiang Ming meant by those words. Looking at the trainer in front of him who clearly didn't know the specifics, Jiang Shu could only slowly explain his situation. I don't know the specifics of the researchers who studied these Pokémon, but I think that since they've come up with a solution, it means they want to select useful Pokémon. Vulpix's strength should be quite useful. Upon receiving Jiang Ming's words, Huo Ting nodded almost without hesitation. If it weren't very useful, he wouldn't have gone to such lengths to obtain this elf. Seeing the lion-like creature on the other side of the window nodding in agreement with his words, Jiang Ming chuckled and then spoke without hesitation. Since it's so useful, why didn't the other party intend to take it away? I speculate that the other party may have seen some weaknesses in this Pokémon, which is why they didn't take it. At this point, Jiang Ming paused for a moment, then glanced at the Jengar beside him. Jiang Ming didn't need to explain much afterward. Based on his action, Huo Ting instantly realized why he had Jengar try it. Since Jengar is now at a higher level and stronger, if Vulpix's abilities can be effective against Jengar, it proves that Vulpix's strength is unpredictable. But Jengar is right here and Vulpix can't launch a full attack on it. Its power is of little use to Jengar. This negligible difference indirectly confirms Jiang Ming's statement. The Six Tails is indeed very powerful, but this power is limited. Realizing the limitations of the Six Tails, Huo Ting scratched his head, looking at Jiang Ming with some concern after seeing the Six Tails condition. This is how it is now, but things should be different after I upgrade it later. He spoke with obvious uncertainty as he didn't know what the Six Tails would become afterward. Perhaps its strength would improve because of his training. It's also possible that his training might not improve his abilities. The thought that if Liyue's training level improved other aspects but not others, Zhai Ting felt a headache coming on. Jiang Ming, who was being questioned by Huo Ting, could naturally tell what was troubling Huo Ting. However, he couldn't give Huo Ting any response. He could only speak calmly to Huo Ting. I'm not sure about this Pokémon's situation. If you want to know more about it, you might want to try it out yourself. This time, he summoned Jengar simply to confirm his suspicions. Now that he has figured it out through experiments, there is naturally no need for Wang Xiaoxiao to consider it further. As for the matter between Vulpix and Houghton, that's a matter between the two of them. No one knows what stage this human and elf will reach next. But no matter what stage it reaches, that's Yuding's business, and what decisions to make is also the person's business. After saying this, Jiang Ming, who had no intention of getting involved in their affairs, left and decided to go to the place where they had been before. Huo Ting did not stop him but simply watched Jiang Ming's retreating figure quietly. Only after Jiang Ming's figure completely disappeared did Huo Ting turn his head and glance at Liyue beside him with a hint of disappointment. After some time, a disheartened Huo Ting put away the six tails and returned to Jiang Ming's place with his companions. He then began to talk to Jiang Ming about the follow-up training in a very positive mood. As a relatively experienced trainer, coupled with his extensive knowledge of the area, Hotten is definitely not a short-sighted trainer. Although I was initially worried because I hadn't been able to discover some of the Six Tails' situation. However, after Jiang Ming's reminder, his worries quickly disappeared. Instead, he felt a sense of joy at having subdued the Six Tails. Overjoyed, Huo Ting chattered on and on about training to Jiang Ming, and when he got to the last point, he couldn't help but reminisce about the six-tailed fox. Although this Pokémon does seem to have various problems, the abilities it has demonstrated are enough for me to reap a huge benefit. As he sighed, Jiang Ming, who hadn't really wanted to discuss these things with him, glanced at him with interest and couldn't help but marvel at his good attitude. Infected by his positive attitude, Jiang Ming smiled and was no longer as resistant as before. She is willing to have a good chat with him about Akko. The exchange between the two sides lasted for a while. After the exchange, Fortin took CCC and other trainers to other areas to search for a period of time. As night fell, they finally found a new area to set up their tents. Because he had been busy all day, Jiang Ming took his pet and decided to rest soon after setting up the tent. The other trainers who had previously been poisoned by Ghastly naturally didn't plan to stay up all night. Seeing that Jiang Ming had gone back to rest, the other trainers quickly followed suit and left one after another. Before long, the area, which had been quite lively due to the large number of trainers stationed there, began to quiet down as the trainers gradually went to rest. Just as it was quiet, a rustling sound suddenly came from beside Jiang Ming. The perceptive Jiang Ming sensed something passing by the moment he heard the sound. He opened his eyes with a serious expression and looked in the direction from which the sound came. When Jiang Ming saw that it was Gardevoir walking out of the tent, he couldn't help but frown slightly. Because the place they came to was quite dangerous except for Jengar, which Jiang Ming would occasionally send out, Gardevoir and Jengar would mostly stay by Jiang Ming's side. Both elves knew that it would be troublesome for Jiang Ming to face danger alone. Knowing all about the situation, Jiang Ming found Xia Sha Huidu's sudden departure a bit strange. He didn't think Gardevoir was such a reckless Pokémon. Because of this lack of awareness, Jiang Ming pondered Gardevoir's current behavior for a moment and ultimately decided not to suspect it, so he quickly walked towards Gardevoir. Gardevoir, who was walking outside, clearly sensed the sound at that moment. Gardevoir paused for a moment when she saw Jiang Ming walking towards her. But just as Jiang Ming trusted her, Gardevoir clearly trusted Jiang Ming very much as well. So when she saw Jiang Ming arrive, Gardevoir didn't try to hide anything. After hesitating for a moment, she pointed in one direction. This means there's a problem in that direction. Jiang Ming, who already trusted Gardevoir, remained silent, simply nodding to it before leading it in the direction Gardevoir indicated. Jiang Ming, who was walking behind with Gardevoir, felt that there was obviously something wrong with Arbok almost as soon as he saw Arbok's wary posture. To avoid such trouble, Jiang Ming's side definitely needs to keep a close eye on things. It turned out to be a sneaky Arbok. The two of them walked for a short time, only a few minutes. They had just left the place where the trainers had set up camp when Jiang Ming saw what Gardevoir was pointing in. Zhang Tian clearly knew that Jiang Ming had no idea what he meant by those words. Seeing Jiang Ming's speechless expression, he could only speak with a hint of helplessness. After looking down at Arbok for a while, Zhang Tian smiled and pointed in a direction. Thinking about how difficult it would be to move around after daybreak, Jiang Ming felt it was necessary to directly and bluntly expose this hidden truth. Seeing Ekans turn and head towards the direction where the trainers were, Jiang Ming, who had been hiding in the shadows observing Ekans' behavior with Gardevoir, breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to keep hiding any longer. Standing not far away, Zhang Tian never expected that someone would suddenly appear and attack his elf. He wouldn't care if it was just a secret, but who knows if song jingling might do something to other trainers while they're sneaking around so late at night. After a while, he looked at Jiang Ming with a speechless expression and couldn't help but speak to him. Because he felt that there was obviously something wrong with this elf, Jiang Ming hesitated for a moment. He didn't plan to get too close, but he also didn't plan to go too far away or go back directly. Besides Zhang Tian, there are several other trainers around him. Those people seemed to trust Zhang Tian quite a bit, and following Zhang Tian's action, the group quickly moved in the direction he indicated. The Gardevoir that was thrown out immediately used Psychic on Arbok. If this continues, it'll probably be dawn by then. You're not my natural nemesis, are you? They've been following him for almost half an hour now, and all they've seen is Zhang Tian making contact with other trainers, but they're not entirely clear on the specifics. Half an hour later, Arbok probably arrived at its destination. After confirming one last time that no one was around, Arbok quickly charged forward. Arbok, which had been inexplicably attacked, stopped moving. That was none other than Zhang Tian, the trainer of Ekans. Ekans seemed very afraid of being discovered by other trainers, so it looked left and right almost every time it took a step, showing extreme vigilance. The two sides continued like this for about half an hour. Seeing Jiang Ming suddenly appear and Gardevoir beside him, Zhang Tian's eyelids twitched wildly. Before long, a familiar person appeared in front of Jiang Ming. Not wanting to wait any longer for dawn, Jiang Ming immediately threw Gardevoir out. Jiang Ming, keeping a close eye on things, led Gardevoir forward while keeping an eye on the Arbok ahead. Those trainers seemed to know Zhang Tian very well. Seeing that Ekans had returned, they immediately put their arms around Zhang Tian's shoulders and started asking him about the details with smiles. If Huo Ting had said this, Jiang Ming would have been more willing to believe him, because although Huo Ting didn't seem like a good person, he was quite principled in many ways. Jiang Ming, who had inexplicably received this sentence, twitched the corner of his mouth, not knowing what it meant. I don't intend to target those trainers this time, I just have some plans of my own to make. I hope you won't interfere. As if receiving a command, the Arbok lowered its head and tried to return to the camp. After those people left one by one, Zhang Tian waved to Arbok. Seeing that Jiang Ming was still waiting for his explanation, Zhang Tian was initially a little hesitant and didn't really want to say some things. If he can really find those people with the 6 tails, maybe he can get something good from them. This happens quite often. Some elves simply don't understand the scheming and backstabbing among humans. After all, that person got to where he is today by upholding morality. After hesitating for a moment, he began to speak to Jiang Ming with a slightly helpless expression, gradually revealing everything about the 6-tailed fox. 6-tails didn't really want to harm Hotting. Since this Pokémon had already been taken in by Huo Jiang, it naturally had no interest in continuing to escape. However, due to Hotten's appearance, Mutsuki's attempt to find the researcher on his own clearly went wrong. Zhang Tian clearly knew that Jiang Ming was worried that he was being deceived. It wasn't until he learned from some of the 6-tails' behavior that he realized the people researching the 6-tails were also on this small island that he began to have an idea. For this precious item, Zhang Tian hesitated for a long time before finally agreeing to Liu Wei's request. But Zhang Tian is different. The trainer in front of him possesses sufficient abilities. Through Zhang Tian's account, Jiang Ming quickly learned a great deal about the situation. It wants to go somewhere. They naively assume that most of the humans who appear in their world are reliable. Seeing Jiang Ming's serious expression, he felt a little helpless but dared not say anything more. Because he possessed sufficient ability to resolve the issue of the September 20th incident, Jiang Ming clearly understood that if he trusted him indiscriminately, he would ultimately be deceived. This was somewhat unexpected for Jiang Ming. After pondering for a while, he reluctantly decided to lay his cards on the table. Seeing that Jiang Ming was somewhat taken aback, Zhang Tian shrugged, looking speechless. Given Huo Ting's sense of morality, Jiang Ming doesn't need to worry about Huo Ting harming him. Jiang Ming, realizing that this might be due to some misunderstanding caused by Liyue, calmly looked at Zhang Tian. The fact that they were able to research and create Pokémon like Ghastly with six-tailed Vulpix is enough to prove that those researchers are definitely not simple-minded. 014402422 Chinese letter 220,082,130. With these abilities, he doesn't need to adhere to any morality or rules. He can solve countless problems using his own methods. Just as I was about to rest, the six-tailed monster that Hotting had captured suddenly found me. 11. After all, if this matter were to succeed, it would be a huge benefit for him. However, considering Jiang Ming's abilities, he ultimately decided not to reveal all the things he had been hiding. After a while, he continued, I was also surprised when the Vulpix found me at first, but later I found out that the Vulpix had seen me in other places before. Based on that impression, it thought I was reliable. However, during her time away from Houghton, Rokujo had a wish. Although he was very unhappy that Houghton had obtained the Vulpix, he was always a proud trainer and wouldn't resort to underhanded tactics because of it. Left with no other option, Liyue had to settle for second best and seek cooperation with Zhang Tian. Zhang Tian, who was found, was not initially very interested in some of the Six-Tails' actions. After all, Vulpix had already become Fullman's spirit, so it didn't have much to do with him anymore. That place was where the researchers studying the Six-Tails stayed. If Furton hadn't appeared, the Six-Tails had planned to find that place and the researchers on its own. Although he agreed, Zhang Tian had no intention of harming Hu Ting. This time he called over other trainers he knew, simply to have them block Hotton's view for him. If Jiang Ming hadn't shown up, his plan would have been very successful. Because of the six-tailed fox leading the way, their progress was very smooth. They can still explore the island normally. Taking advantage of the fact that Hu Ting and his team hadn't noticed, he took Liyue away and then, under cover of night, went to the place Liyue had mentioned and returned quickly. He wasn't sure whether what Zhang Tian said was true or false. When he returned, the Six-Tails had already been rescued. However, he has always been a fairly intelligent trainer who knows how to think outside the box. Alright, when do you guys bring out the Six-Tails? Once you bring it out, I'll go with you to check on the situation. Based on the Six-Tails movement, Jiang Ming clearly knew that this was where the Six-Tails was headed. The thought that the plan was going so smoothly but was intercepted by Jiang Ming halfway through made Zhang Tian extremely annoyed. But if everything is really as Zhang Tian said, then he should indeed go with Zhang Tian to see what's going on. Therefore, Zhang Tian naturally wouldn't consider cooperating well with Hu Ting. After all, everyone came for their own benefit, and since we've already reached our destination, there's no need for us to gather together again. But Jiang Ming 350 is different. Although he also came for his own benefit, he would dismantle it if absolutely necessary. Jiang Ming remained calm despite Zhang Tian's words and the fact that he didn't mind being brought along. But before the team disbanded, he would treat everyone else as his teammates. Therefore, Zhang Tian easily believed Liyue after only a few casual words of coaxing. He then turned around and quickly brought Jenger and the other Pokémon along. After his headache subsided, he quickly turned his serious gaze to Jiang Ming and spoke directly. Upon arriving here, Six-Tails excitedly ran towards two dilapidated-looking instruments in the middle of the grass. More than an hour later, they arrived at the center of a grassy area on the island. After exploring for a few days, they will be able to leave the island. With this different thought in mind, Jiang Ming did not want to comment on these matters with Zhang Tian. Upon learning that Zhang Tian was going to bring out the Vulpix at this time, Jiang Ming left Gardevoir here. The trainers he arranged were all mercenaries with their own methods. Given their skills, Hotting's team wouldn't be able to discover Vulpix's disappearance in the short term. The group continued moving forward calmly. When Liyue saw that Jiang Ming was actually with Zhang Tian, she was still a little wary of Jiang Ming's appearance. However, this vigilance did not last long, as elves who easily trust humans are not particularly wary to begin with. After thinking it over for a moment, Jiang Ming, who didn't know the specifics of Zhang Tian's situation, gritted his teeth and helplessly spoke to the person in front of him. By tomorrow, during the day, Wu will have no way of knowing the specifics. Unfortunately, Jiang Ming appeared, Jiang Ming did not respond to Zhang Tian's words. In Zhang Tian's eyes, their team was one that could fall apart at any moment. That's all we have in our plan. If you're interested in this matter, I wouldn't mind taking you along. Looking at Vulpix, who so easily trusts its trainer, Jiang Ming with his Pokémon muttered with a headache as he moved forward. After this matter is resolved, I really should let Hugh train this Pokémon's Vigilance 5. Having already guessed that Jiang Ming would definitely follow them, Zhang Tian took a breath and then quickly gave a time. Zhang Tian, who was walking ahead, calmly looked at Jiang Ming and said, "You're quite considerate of those trainers." Zhang Tian was very interested in trainers who could research and create Pokémon like Vulpix. Upon seeing the Six-Tails action, he excitedly began to move towards it. Jiang Ming spent a little more time observing his surroundings. Jiang Ming's expression, which had been focused on him, suddenly turned serious. All around were piles of broken copper and iron. At first glance, they didn't seem to have any major problems, but upon closer inspection, it could be seen that most of the broken copper and iron were in a broken state. If someone were living here normally and were simply throwing away trash, things shouldn't be like this. If it's glass, breaking is perfectly normal, but most of the time, ironware is just thrown away when it's no longer usable, so there's no need to deliberately break it. After all, breaking these iron objects would take a lot of time and effort. No one would spend this time and energy unless absolutely necessary. Jiang Ming, who thought it was unnecessary to waste time and energy breaking things up here, pondered for a moment and started heading in the direction of Zhang Tian, intending to tell Zhang Tian that something was wrong in the vicinity. Just then, a shout suddenly came from ahead. Jiang Ming, who was familiar with the sound, recognized it almost immediately as the cry of the six-tailed fox. He quickly ran towards the direction of the six-tails. As soon as they arrived there, they saw something that looked like a jar lying in front of the six-tails. All I could see was a thick layer of acrylic sheet on top of it. Because it was a transparent panel, Jiang Ming could clearly see a woman lying inside through the acrylic panel. The woman had her eyes closed and didn't seem to be in good condition. The six-tailed fox was clearly concerned about the woman who was not in good condition and kept patting the jar, trying to open it and pull the woman out. Unfortunately, the six-tails, who didn't know much about jars, clearly didn't have the ability to open them, so no matter how hard it tried, it ultimately failed. Zhang Tian, seeing the six-tails' anxious struggle and inability to succeed, clearly wanted to help. However, because Vulpix was in a hurry, neither Zhang Tian nor his Pokémon could get close to it. Looking at the six-tailed fox, which seemed to be in very bad shape and was quite ferocious, Zhang Tian glanced at it speechlessly before finally turning to look at Jiang Ming. Clearly, he was hoping Jiang Ming could help solve this problem. Jiang Ming, who was being waited for, reluctantly came to Liyue's side. Vulpix treats all trainers equally. It was as fierce as it was to Zhang Tian, so it wouldn't be much better to treat Jiang Ming the same way. Seeing Jiang Ming approach, Liyue immediately tried to drive him away. Jiang Ming could tell that the Vulpix's action was not related to him. He simply had Gardevoir block the Vulpix's movement. Just as Vulpix was getting agitated by Gardevoir's action, Jiang Ming turned to look at the woman sealed in the jar and asked Vulpix curiously, "Is this the researcher who created you?" Six-Tails clearly understood Jiang Ming's question. Upon hearing it, Six-Tails immediately became nervous and ran straight towards the jar, staring intently at Jiang Ming. It's clear they were really wary of Jiang Ming taking the jar away. Based on the Six-Tails action, Jiang Ming knew that the woman inside was probably the researcher who created the Six-Tails. Realizing the good thing about this, Jiang Ming thoughtfully looked around at the situation. Only after he looked closely did he discover that besides the girl there were several other jars around. Without exception, there was a person lying in every one of those jars. Near the jar was some damp grass. Even though there's no water here, the grass looks like it's been submerged for a long time and hasn't dried out yet. Jiang Ming, who was good at understanding many things, quickly guessed what was going on under this strange state. Jiang Ming glanced at Ghastly with a mocking look, not interested in paying any attention to Ghastly. Instead, he quickly brought out his other Pokémon and began directing them to help him move the jar away. "If you leave these jars there, your researchers may perish at sea." After all the jars were moved, Jiang Ming quickly put away Ghastly, which was locked in a fierce battle with Vulpix. Although communication between the two sides is unlikely to be very smooth, since Vulpix operates on a Pokémon-like mindset, it's impossible for it to explain many things clearly. The Ghastly that was thrown out was clearly dazed and had no idea what was happening. He looked at Zhang Tian not far away with a solemn expression. This place was probably flooded by the water next to it before. However, just as Ghastly turned to go back, Jiang Ming, holding the jars, sneered and said to Ghastly, "The Pokémon I have are still quite strong. If you think you can handle the punishment when you come back, I don't care." Jiang Ming, who could tell that Liyue understood him, smiled and looked at Liyue. "We only moved these things over because of the emergency. Now that it's safe here, you don't need to worry about what we'll do to these things. We can talk about what's to come." Vulpix couldn't stay in one place forever. Seeing that Ghastly had been put away, Vulpix immediately charged towards Jiang Ming. Therefore, Ghastly, upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, naturally could not obediently follow Jiang Ming's instructions. Jiang Ming knew what Zhang Tian was thinking, but he didn't show any dissatisfaction. He just ran quickly toward the jar. This was clearly telling Jiang Ming that now that he knew how dangerous this place was, he couldn't stay any longer. After all, if it were obedient, Ghastly wouldn't have gone through so much trouble with Jiang Ming in the beginning. As soon as Ghastly was thrown out, Jiang Ming grabbed one of the containers and commanded Ghastly, "Help me trap Vulpix. Don't hurt this Pokémon. Song needs to make sure the Pokémon can't stop me. As for whether the people inside the jar are dead or alive, that will of course have to wait until it is safe to determine the situation." Jiang Ming, who could tell that Liyue was very angry about his behavior, was speechless and quickly spoke to Liyue. "Ghastly has a temper, but it can also be a bit irritable." The Ghastly captured by Jiang Ming was not an extremely obedient Pokémon. Jiang Ming certainly couldn't let Liyue waste his time. His life was still very important. As a relatively vigilant trainer, Zhang Tian had actually noticed the state of the wet deer around him. What if they accidentally fall directly into the water? Seeing Jiang Ming's actions, Zhang Tian certainly didn't dare to stay and waste time. He quickly threw out his own Pokémon and the group moved things together rapidly. Liyue was still in the same state as before. As soon as it saw Jiang Ming's actions, it let out a dissatisfied cry, clearly wanting to fight Jiang Ming. His guess was the same as Jiang Ming's. That's why he didn't really want to stay here any longer, since no one knew the specifics of the place. At Jiang Ming's words, the cowardly Ghastly glanced at Jiang Ming silently and let out a dissatisfied squeak. As they moved the containers, a dozen or so cans were gradually transferred to the manufacturing area. Therefore, upon seeing Vulpix's angry actions, Jiang Ming did not hesitate to throw Ghastly out. The six-tailed fox, which could understand human speech to some extent, stopped moving upon hearing Jiang Ming's words. "We should resolve the issue of the six tails as soon as possible and then quickly take those jars away." Jiang Ming didn't need Ghastly to know what had happened. Then, with that dissatisfied cry, Ghastly charged straight toward Vulpix, showing no mercy to its companions. Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, Zhang Tian nodded to Jiang Ming and pointed with his long, narrow fingers in the direction of the six tails. However, considering Liyue's situation, although he didn't really want to stay, Zhang Tian gritted his teeth and stayed. Unfortunately, Jiang Ming's plan did not go as scheduled. With this question in mind, Jiang Ming went to the six-tailed fox's side, where the hostility seemed to have lessened considerably, and began to ask questions about what he knew. Having learned from Liyue that these researchers were actually alive and still had their bodily functions intact, Jiang Ming quickly began to check on each of them one by one in the direction they were located. Perhaps they can learn something from some of the six-tails' behavior. As a big shot, Jiang Ming knew that as long as he told Shen Fei what was going on here, she would definitely be able to help him solve some problems. It's unclear why the researcher would protect the duck on his body when he knew that oxygen was likely to be scarce. Even if Liyue's expression is unclear, it is still an expression. But no matter what, Jiang Ming couldn't just stand by and watch a researcher die like that. With a cracking sound, the jar in front of the researcher began to shatter. After all, even if there is a lot of oxygen in the tank, it is still limited. Point 0? Moreover, this container may look like an unsafe thing, but it actually contains various oxygen and other equipment. Through some unclear expressions from Liyue, Jiang Ming pieced together the information and quickly learned from Liyue's behavior that the researchers had not died. With this little bit of knowledge, Jiang Ming quickly found the button to open it. Zhang Tian, who was surveying his surroundings, quickly turned his head and saw that Jiang Ming had already completely opened the jar containing the researcher holding the Golduck. Since Vulpix was able to bring these trainers here, it's enough to prove that Vulpix knows a lot about this place. The researchers were able to maintain their bodily functions thanks to the oxygen and other substances inside. It might be enough for one person, but if both a person and an elf need to use it, it will be a bit of a stretch. For example, why are all these researchers inside jars and why do they all look like they're not in very good condition? They are simply trapped inside this jar for various reasons. Although he didn't understand research, Jiang Ming knew how humans would change when problems arose, and he almost immediately realized that the researcher had probably reached his limit. But no matter how small an ant is, it's still meat. This kind of research doesn't need to last long. After all, he has a powerful mother. He may not understand all the details of the research, but he definitely knows how to use some of the equipment. The last researcher was holding a Golda duck tightly in his arms. Because he didn't know much about these things, Jiang Ming didn't dare to blindly take action against the jars. So even though he had no idea about the researcher's situation, Jiang Ming hurriedly and frantically began to study the jar the researcher was in. He made a new discovery when he examined the last researcher. As Jiang Ming had expected, Mio, being an incapable of communication, naturally couldn't express anything to Jiang Jin. After all, he didn't understand these things, but his mother knew a great deal. However, compared to the normal condition of the other researchers, this researcher was clearly in worse condition, and even his face had turned bluish-purple. The other researchers just stayed inside the jars, looking as if they were asleep. But just as Jiang Ming thought, even the smallest ant is still meat. The Golduck now has its eyes closed and looks like it's asleep, just like the researcher. He originally just wanted to take a quick look, and once he had a clear picture of the situation, he would start contacting outside help. Zhang Tian's expression turned ugly as he was surprised by Jiang Ming's speed and quickly went to Jiang Ming's side. He looked in the direction of the Goda brain with slight displeasure. The other researchers are fine. They all have oxygen, so there's no need to worry about their lives in the short term. 4.7 Looking at the researcher lying obediently on the ground, Jiang Ming looked around and finally had no choice but to helplessly command his Pokémon to guide Golduck away. Taking advantage of the Golduck's retreat, Jiang Ming quickly went to the researcher's side and checked the researcher's breathing. Because the researcher is about to die. Just then, the Golduck on the researcher's body suddenly opened its eyes. But if these researchers from 17 regain their ability to move freely, then they will have the power to escape. We haven't determined the specifics of this thing yet, and opening it like this could very likely harm these researchers. Of course, this statement sounds a bit high-sounding, and Zhang Tian is definitely not that kind person. The other Pokémon around Jiang Ming were startled by his actions and quickly ran to his side, watching Golduck warily as it opened its eyes. Having already guessed that Zhang Tian was clearly unaware of the specifics, Jiang Ming immediately revealed the researcher's connection to Golduck. If he could, he would actually be willing to stand on Zhang Tian's side since the current situation is indeed a bit unclear. Although the elf who opened his eyes startled Jiang Ming. At least for now, it can't be as energetic as Golduck, and it can't even open its eyes like Golduck. Fortunately, Jiang Ming's Pokémon were alert enough that when Golduck launched its attack, his Pokémon reacted quickly and blocked the attack almost immediately. Thinking of the researcher's condition, Jiang Ming helplessly spread his hands. People who are so reckless should be punished. The relatively kind-hearted Jiang Ming glanced calmly at Zhang Tian before heading straight to the researcher to check on his condition. Then his gaze fell on the trainer who was holding Golduck. These researchers can learn more by lying in the jars. Driven by this selfish motive, Zhang Tian was actually unwilling to let these researchers return to normal so easily. But the problem is that it's not really possible right now. He said that simply because he didn't know much about many things in the area. The group of Pokémon who were already somewhat upset by Golduck's sudden attack did not hesitate to lead Golduck in a retreat. The other person's lips had turned a bit bluish-purple. Although they looked a little better after being freed, it wasn't much better. Zhang Tian looked at Jiang Ming with a puzzled expression, not quite understanding what Jiang Ming meant by those words. Jiang Ming could also tell that Zhang Tian had no intention of letting these researchers return to normal. Having narrowly escaped, Jiang Ming quickly retreated, only to be attacked by the duck at that moment. Compared to Golduck, who doesn't have any major problems, this researcher's situation is a bit more troublesome. After all, everyone has their own thoughts. He wasn't interested in what Zhang Tian was thinking. He only knew that Zhang Tian wasn't interested in watching a researcher lose his life. By then, he won't be able to learn more. Sensing that Zhang Tian was somewhat displeased with the researcher's actions, Jiang Ming rubbed his nose and refrained from commenting to Zhang Tian at that moment. After regaining consciousness, Gotha seemed perfectly fine and full of energy. Fortunately, although the researcher looked very unwell, he was still breathing. Upon learning that a researcher had chosen to share oxygen with a Pokémon despite knowing there wasn't enough, Zhang Tian frowned slightly and spoke with some displeasure. Relieved to find that the researcher was breathing, Jiang Ming began to check on the researcher's physical condition. However, just as he was about to check, the Golduck, which had been led away, angrily charged at him again. Jiang Ming's Pokémon were truly dedicated. As soon as Golduck charged over, a group of Pokémon immediately gathered around Golduck and pulled it away. However, Golduck is clearly determined to protect the researcher. So Golduck didn't go very far after being taken away. Instead, it would cause trouble whenever it had the chance. Jiang Ming, who had originally planned to learn more about the researcher, was now extremely annoyed by the disruption. After a while, he finally couldn't resist taking out Nidoran and throwing it in the direction of Golduck. As soon as Nidoking appeared, Jiang Ming commanded Nidoking to launch a poison sting attack on Golduck. Because of Nidoking's powerful attack, Golduck, which had been interfering with Jiang Ming, quickly began to retreat under Jiang Ming's command. Having determined that they could no longer interfere with him once they reached Golduck's location, Jiang Ming stopped what he was doing and stared coldly in Golduck's direction. "I'm checking on this researcher's condition. If you don't want him to die, then you'd better stay here and see what happens." His words clearly had some effect on Golduck. Golduck, which was initially annoyed by Jiang Ming's Pokémon attack, stiffened for a moment in response to Jiang Ming's attitude. However, it wasn't particularly useful. After a short while, Golduck angrily attacked Jiang Ming again. It was obvious that this elf didn't really trust Jiang Ming. Knowing that Nidoking wasn't very willing to trust him, Jiang Ming could only helplessly begin directing Nidoking to suppress Golduck. Fortunately, Nidoking's strength was still there and Goblin wasn't so overpowered that Jiang Ming couldn't handle him. So in a very short time, Golduck was overwhelmed and beaten by Nidoking. Taking advantage of the moment when Golduck was being overwhelmed, Jiang Ming quickly came to Zhang Tian's side and directed Zhang Tian to help him check the researcher's specific condition. Zhang Tian, who originally didn't intend to meddle, could only obediently follow Jiang Ming's instructions, even though he was already there. It would not be good for him to have a disagreement with Jiang Mingjian at this time. Jiang Ming, who had long suspected that Zhang Tian, though not a good person, would never sacrifice his own interests, was quite satisfied with Zhang's behavior. With the help of him and Zhang Tian, Jiang Ming quickly got a clear understanding of the researcher's specific situation. Jiang Ming wasn't sure if the other person had any serious illnesses, but he knew for sure that the researcher hadn't been in good condition in that jar before. However, after being released from the jar, the researcher's condition began to recover. Even if Jiang Ming didn't need to do anything, the researcher could return to normal after a period of time. Jiang Ming breathed a sigh of relief, clearly sensing that the researcher's condition was recovering. He then turned to look at Nidoking, who was still beating up Golduck. Seeing that Golduck had been beaten into a frenzy, Jiang Ming, who didn't really want to be enemies with Golduck, quickly recalled King Kijuo. Having suddenly lost an opponent, Gotha had a momentary 843. After a moment of stunned silence, the elf quickly ran towards Jiang Ming and stood firmly in front of him. It's clear that this elf's only goal is to protect that researcher. Sensing Golduck's hostility, Jiang Ming slowly raised his hand and took a few steps back, speaking to Golduck with a slightly embarrassed expression. "Don't worry, I have no intention of harming your researcher. I just checked on the researcher's condition." Golduck doesn't quite trust Jiang Ming's words, probably because Jiang Ming just released Nidoking. Jiang Ming, who had already guessed that Golduck didn't trust him much, didn't care that he said those words simply for the researchers behind Golduck to hear. This researcher clearly didn't end up in this state because of any major problem. Seeing that he was completely unaware of the specifics, Jiang Ming reluctantly began to tell him some of his own stories. This irresponsible behavior is likely to make things worse. When the researcher learned from Jiang Ming that this place was actually a small island, a hesitant expression appeared on his face. The other Pokémon who noticed Curlia's actions were probably worried that Curlia would be wronged, so they quickly followed her toward Gothamin. If someone leaves without knowing what the danger is, it proves they're destined to miss out on something precious. After making this small arrangement, Jiang Ming didn't plan to do anything else. Jiang Ming, being rather cautious, stayed by Zhang Tian's side, intending to discuss the current situation with him. Knowing the researchers were wary of humans, Jiang Ming remained completely calm. He calmly squatted down in front of the researcher. "Do you know where you are right now? Letter 3005, letter 3005. Unbeknownst to Jiang Ming, Curlia was slowly walking towards Golduck at that moment. In fact, Jiang Ming had already considered leaving when he saw the state of the researchers. This small island was clearly not as peaceful as it appeared on the surface. Taking action without fully understanding the situation would be irresponsible of him. However, because he didn't know the specifics, Jiang Ming didn't act impulsively, even though he wanted to leave. The very cautious researcher looked around, and when he saw that Darby was right next to him and that he was surrounded by other Pokémon, a look of relief immediately appeared on his face. It's clear that his enemy is not an elf. Curlia seemed very friendly, and when she saw that Golduck didn't attack her, she took a few steps closer to Golduck. After all, Jiang Ming as an outsider was completely unaware of the current situation. Just as Jiang Ming was surprised, the researcher who had been keeping his eyes closed suddenly opened them. Golduck was clearly wary of the group of Pokémon that were besieging it. As soon as it saw the group of Pokémon arrive, it immediately launched an attack on them. As soon as he opened his eyes, he looked around warily. It was clear that the person around him was a very cautious individual. After a while, he said to Jiang Ming with a hint of helplessness, "I suggest you leave here as soon as possible." After all, fortune favors the bold. Realizing that no elf would attack the group of researchers, Jiang Ming hesitated for a moment, and after the researcher paused for a moment, he walked directly in the direction of the researchers. The two elves gradually drew closer to each other, calling out to each other repeatedly. Completely unable to understand what the two Pokémon were whispering about, Jiang Ming looked at Curlia in astonishment, never expecting that Curlia could have such a function. The only one that wasn't attacked was Curlia. It's unclear what the purpose of Curlia's cry is, but Goblin has clearly lost much of its wariness towards Curlia. Before long, Gao Dachao's forces had surrounded a large circle of elves. By the time Jiang Ming and Zhang Tian had finished discussing and realized what was happening, Curlia had already gained Golduck's trust, and the two Pokémon gathered around the researcher and started whispering to each other. These researchers likely experienced something here, therefore no one knows whether the researcher is even able to hear at the moment. Upon suddenly hearing the sound, the researcher remained alert. He abruptly looked towards the source of the sound, and when he saw Jiang Ming, a wary expression immediately appeared on his face. If the other party were to hear this, then Jiang Ming saying this would at least give them some insight once they regained their senses. Upon seeing the low, soft calls from Chiruguan expressing a peaceful attitude, Golduck slowly stopped its movements and called out to Chiruguan. Then it lowered its head and slowly let out a soft call to the Golduck. The researcher, who had just regained consciousness, had no idea where he was. He looked around in confusion. Therefore, even if there are some problems in this area, Jiang Ming needs to understand them thoroughly. Determined to understand the situation clearly, Jiang Ming sat firmly in front of the researcher. The researchers could clearly see that Jiang Ming didn't actually want to leave, he just wanted to get something from the place. Having long known that it wouldn't be so easy to persuade people to leave, Yi sighed helplessly. He then didn't intend to talk to Jiang Ming much more, but instead turned his attention to Golduck. "I don't know what they talked about. Golduck, which had been insisting on staying in the same spot, started to hesitate and turn its head to look at other areas while it was studying the story. Zhang Tian moved to Jiang Ming's side and looked at Golduck's current condition. He couldn't help but cautiously speak to Jiang Ming. This elf seems to have realized that these researchers are not working together. Upon hearing Zhang Tian's words, Jiang Ming looked at him with confusion, not quite understanding what he meant by those words. Just as Jiang Ming was filled with doubt, Zhang Tian glanced at the researchers in front of him with a hint of disappointment, and then turned his gaze to the 6 tails. Although he didn't understand what Zhang Tian meant at first, Jiang Ming quickly learned about Zhang Dao's situation by following Zhang Tian's gaze. Zhang Tian came here with Vulpix simply because he felt that the fact that they could create Pokémon outfits like Vulpix CCFF proved that these researchers probably had even more powerful Pokémon at their disposal. In order to obtain a more powerful and stronger spirit, Zhang Tian would definitely be willing to take a risk. But now that we're here, we haven't seen any powerful Pokémon. The only Golduck we saw seemed rather ordinary. In this situation, Zhang Tian could only hope that Golduck hadn't shown its true abilities. However, Zhang Tian was somewhat disappointed that Golduck didn't seem to be with the researchers at all. Jiang Ming, sensing Zhang Tian's slight disappointment, spread his hands. What if those elves are still scattered throughout the island? Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, Zhang Tian naturally understood that Jiang Ming was clearly trying to comfort him. He chuckled, said nothing, and simply turned his gaze back to the researcher and Golduck. It's obvious they're planning to capture Golduck. Jiang Ming naturally had no interest in participating in Zhang Tian's plan. He has many Pokémon and he won't casually use them unless they are particularly attractive to him. Golduck seems to be fairly strong right now, but it hasn't reached a point where it's particularly attractive to him. Just when Jiang Ming thought Golduck wasn't particularly attractive to him, Golduck, who was talking to the researcher, paused for a moment and then suddenly started running wildly in another direction. Jiang Ming, who was still thinking about Zhang Tian and Golduck, immediately stood up when he saw Golduck's action. The researcher naturally saw Jiang Ming's actions, and seeing that Jiang Ming wanted to take the Pokémon to chase Golduck, he quickly spoke up. That elf has nothing to do with us, it's just returning to its original habitat. Jiang Ming, who had been stopped by the researcher, paused his actions and looked at the researcher with a hint of surprise. The researcher, feeling Jiang Ming's gaze, sighed helplessly and spoke to Jiang Ming. The oxygen in my tank was destroyed and I wouldn't have been able to survive otherwise. It was the appearance of this Golduck that gave me a chance to survive. As he spoke, he turned to look at Zhang Tian, and after confirming that neither Jiang Ming nor Zhang Tian intended to continue pursuing Golduck, he smiled and changed the subject, beginning to recount stories about the island. Jiang Ming did not stop him, but when he saw him walking towards his companion, he turned to look at Zhang Tian beside him. However, when they went to look for their tools, they discovered that all of them had been vandalized. The researchers didn't waste any time explaining their current situation, even though they still had enough oxygen. Left with no other choice, they had to abandon their search for the real culprit and quickly return to their research institute, where they used these tools that looked like jars. Without tools to help them fall into the water, they simply have no chance of survival. They chose this island as their location because there were almost no elves or humans on it. After its fierce attack, one of the elves pounced directly towards Zhang Tian, clearly mistaking him for the culprit who had abducted the elf. You guys actually managed to sneak away with my Pokémon while we were resting. Please give me flowers. These tools are what they use when they want to bring some spirits into the sea. They don't have much freedom, but they have enough oxygen to last for a while in the ocean. They were naturally excited to have discovered this, so after confirming that they had achieved more than half of their goal, they happily planned to leave the island with the elves they had been researching. Then Hotting's voice came through. He would even stand by and watch the show without hesitation. But that doesn't mean they'll foolishly stay put. This statement is extremely vicious. Because there was no interference, they conducted research on the island and even took the opportunity to discover something that could break through some of the Pokémon's abilities. If they can be rescued within a certain time, everyone will be safe and sound. However, if they are still in the water after the time is up and have not been rescued, everyone will have to sink into the sea together with this container. Normally, Jiang would never meddle in other people's business. Instead, he would just watch the two trainers have a good fight. If they were only on the lower level, they could have easily left the island with their tools. After all, they just wanted to find a secluded place to conduct their research. They weren't foolish enough to isolate themselves from the world. Driven by these curiosities, Jiang Ming quickly calmed down as the researcher recounted his story and returned to the researcher's side to listen attentively. While there are indeed many good things here, you also need to be alive to get them. After saying what he needed to say, he began to walk towards his companions, clearly intending to rescue them. Therefore, Zhang Tian first needed to check whether their tools had been damaged. But just as they were about to leave, the deserted and seemingly harmless island suddenly began to sink. However, just as Zhang Tian turned to run, a sound came from not far away. 014402422 Chinese letter 220,122,180. After learning about the situation here, it was clear that Zhang Tian had no intention of staying here any longer. This near absence of interference naturally eliminates various forms of interference. Unfortunately, this situation was quite serious. Seeing that Houghton was extremely angry and Vulpix was trembling slightly because of Houghton's rage, Jiang Ming quickly threw Lucario out to block the fighting Pokémon. Jiang Ming quickly learned some information from the researcher's statement. Compared to the Golduck incident, Jiang Ming was more curious about what exactly happened on the island and why so many researchers were hiding inside jars. This island used to be a deserted island with few people and there weren't many elves on it. It turns out that Zhang Tian was indeed the culprit who abducted the elves. They weren't entirely sure what exactly was causing the destruction. All they knew was that if the island continued to sink, they would all fall into the water. Unable to contact anyone outside, Jiang Ming reluctantly put away his phone and could only run faster. Quickly go with your people to contact other trainers. I'll go check if the tools are still there. However, unlike the energetic Golduck at the beginning, this time when they found Golduck, it was by the water and looked seriously injured. As he ran, Jiang Ming took out his phone to try and contact people outside. All the tools left by trainers who came here have disappeared. Huo Ting froze for a moment when he realized that neither Zhang Tian nor Jiang Ming were 497 who had come to steal the six-tailed fox. A group of researchers, worried that these trainers might have problems as a result, quickly said to Jiang Ming, "You can discuss it again after we get back to shore." Most of them weren't particularly hostile, and after this incident they had no intention of staying here. Source: Kang Kui's business opening this field. The island hasn't sunk yet, so they're not in immediate danger. Plus, they have plenty of trainers and Pokémon. After his angry outburst, he didn't waste any more words and immediately released his Pokémon, intending to search the island. The person hiding in the shadows might not necessarily escape unscathed. This search was quite effective. In just half an hour, Jiang Ming found the familiar elf not far from their location. That was none other than Golduck, who had left after talking with the researcher. Huo Ting was so angry that he gritted his teeth. So when he heard Jiang Ming's arrangement, he didn't waste any words and turned to run. But Jiang Ming's situation is different. They still have more time. Although it was awkward, Houghton was clearly not a stupid trainer. Treasures are great, but you have to be alive to get them. However, before leaving, they were clearly aware that there were quite a few trainers on this island for some reason. Fortunately, the island wasn't particularly large and they reached their destination in just a few minutes. The trainers who had received the news and rushed over there stared wide-eyed at the disappearing tool. Understanding the researcher's good intentions, Jiang Ming turned to look at Fu Ting beside him. The badly injured Golduck became extremely wary upon seeing a large group of trainers arrive, letting out angry cries at every trainer who tried to approach. Just then, the voices of the researchers came from not far away. "Now is the moment to determine whether I will survive." Seeing that Huo Ting was embarrassed by his gaze and expression, Jiang Ming naturally didn't intend to waste any more time. He quickly put away his Pokémon and then spoke seriously to Huo Ting beside him. Fu Ting, who was initially very angry, learned from Jiang Ming's explanation that Liu had only come to find the previous researcher. Jiang Ming, who believed that those hiding in the shadows might not be able to escape, acted swiftly and began arranging for others to join the search. The good news is that they reached their destination, but the bad news is that their tools were not there. Unfortunately, this place is an island, not the outside world, so there is basically no cell phone signal here. Huo Ting, who originally only had a grudge against Jiang Tian, suddenly turned his fierce gaze to Jiang Ming after Jiang Ming's action. Seeing that he had run away, Jiang Ming quickly led the remaining Pokémon, along with Jiang Tian and the trainer, towards where they had stored their tools. Jiang Ming, who could clearly sense that Mittering felt threatened because of his attitude, sighed helplessly. Naturally, he could not waste any more time, so he quickly went to Fittering's side and told him about the researcher. Don't let me find out which B*** D did this. Jiang Ming did not stop Huo Ting's actions. Previously, the researchers were only able to work because of a shortage of personnel and the extremely tight deadline. This incident, however, prevented Kang Song from conducting the research himself. Fortunately, Jiang Ming had made his presence known before, so although Golduck seemed wary of other trainers, it treated Jiang Ming fairly well. With this positive attitude, Jiang Ming quickly approached Golduck and seriously turned his head to look around. Unable to see any particularly threatening Pokémon, Jiang Ming could only continue to focus his attention on Golduck, checking its wounds. He wasn't a professional doctor and couldn't treat Golduck. Most of the tools he carried were just simple treatment tools which weren't very effective. However, as a trainer who often roams outside and also because he has studied at school, Jiang Ming is still able to handle some simple matters. Once Jiang Ming determined that Golduck's wounds, though serious, were not fatal, he stopped wasting time and began treating Ice Eye, having built his own industrial island. After finishing the treatment, Jiang Ming looked at the Golduck in front of him seriously. The wounds on your body look like they were caused by a scythe or some other sharp weapon. Who did this to you? As Jiang Ming inquired, the group of trainers who had been observing the situation also looked warily toward Golduck. It was obvious they were all waiting for Gotha to tell the story. Unfortunately, Golduck clearly can't explain some things clearly. After all, it's an elf. Golduck, unable to communicate with its trainer, could only nervously point in a direction. Fortunately, most trainers don't expect Golduck to be able to explain everything clearly right now. All they need to do now is understand the basic direction. So, after Golduck's action, the trainers quickly realized what was happening and without further ado headed straight in the direction Golduck was pointing. Taking advantage of the trainers leaving, Jiang Ming also pulled Golduck up, intending to take it to a safer place to recover. However, just as Jiang Ming was about to leave with Golduck, he suddenly heard a whooshing sound. Jengar suddenly appeared to Jiang Ming's left. Jiang Ming, who was startled by Jengar's drift, reacted quickly. Although it's unclear what exactly happened, Jengar's urgent action is enough to prove that he is clearly in danger. In just a few seconds, Jiang Ming spurred Golduck and pounced in another direction. Just as he lunged down, he heard another clanging sound, followed by gasps from the trainers. Jiang Ming quickly looked toward the trainer who had exclaimed in surprise and saw several figures engaged in battle ahead. Among those engaged in battle was Jengar. In front of Jengar was a Scyther. The Scyther moved very fiercely and its attacks on Jengar were almost always fatal. Fortunately, Jengar is a ghost-type Pokémon which is quite different from other Pokémon with physical bodies. So although Scyther looks very fierce and swings its scythes around at Jengar, it's not particularly useful. Jiang Ming, who was initially worried about Jengar, breathed a sigh of relief after seeing that Jengar was unharmed. He then moved Dagon to a safe place with a slightly helpless look before quickly returning to the trainers. He hesitated before speaking. This Scyther must be quite high level, it can actually fight Jengar to a standstill. It seems we'll need your help. The trainers, reminded by Jiang Ming, naturally had no intention of wasting time. After all, they were now facing the same crisis. If we are short-sighted and do not help at this time, it could very well escalate into a much bigger problem. 014402422 Chinese letter 220,130,2030. Therefore, at Jiang Ming's request, they took out their Piquet balls almost without hesitation. With the help of these trainers, the flying mantis was unable to get close to any trainer and was immediately pinned down by these Pokémon one after another. Taking advantage of the moment when they were holding down the scyther, Jiang Ming stopped what he was doing and began to think about the scyther's situation. He just mentioned that the wounds on Godaping's body looked like they were caused by a knife or other sharp weapon. Now that scyther has appeared, Jiang Ming knows for certain that the wounds on Golduck's body were clearly caused by scyther. Although he didn't know what was going on with the scyther, after realizing that the scyther had already harmed a Pokémon, Jiang Ji quickly calmed himself down and gave commands to the group of Pokémon in front of him. Take control of this flying mantis. After saying that, Jiang Ming quickly started asking the other trainers about tools. Most trainers who come here are fully prepared, so they naturally have all kinds of tools on them. Upon learning that Jiang Ming wanted a rope, one of the trainers who had a rope quickly took it out, even though they didn't know what was going on with Jiang Ming. Having obtained the tool, Jiang Ming quickly ran towards the flying mantis, intending to take this opportunity to capture it directly. Sensing danger and Jiang Ming's movements, the scyther quickly swung its scythes and attacked the surrounding Pokémon. When scyther is wielding its scythe, the other Pokémon certainly won't approach it casually. Jiang Ming wasn't in a hurry. He watched scyther waving its scythe to keep other Pokémon away and planned to strike when scyther was exhausted. But just as he was about to strike, the scyther suddenly retreated quickly and then turned and ran away. Completely surprised that scyther's actions just now weren't about engaging in a battle but rather about running away, Jiang Ming's eyes widened and he quickly led his Pokémon to give chase. The other trainers didn't waste any time either. They thought their own Pokémon could take down scyther, so they didn't think much of it. I didn't expect the flying mantis to develop cells so quickly. Seeing that the scyther had escaped, they didn't waste any more words and quickly followed suit, flanking it from all directions. With their sheer numbers, the scyther simply couldn't outrun them. The chase lasted only a dozen minutes. A dozen minutes later, Jiang Ming appeared behind scyther with a group of Pokémon. Meanwhile, other trainers gradually gathered around scyther, clearly surrounding it. The scyther, surrounded, looked at the group of trainers with a panicked expression. Jiang Ming, who had no intention of harming scyther, helplessly raised the rope in his hand and looked at scyther. We didn't intend to hurt you, we just wanted to clarify a few things. If Jiang Ming hadn't been holding the rope, Flying Carp would probably have believed it. But now that Jiang Ming is holding the rope, Flying Carp wouldn't be foolish enough to trust him at this moment. Jiang Ming knew that scyther wouldn't trust him so easily, so when scyther came toward him without hesitation, Jiang Ming quickly commanded his Pokémon to attack. Having already fought one battle and then pursued Jiang Ming for some time, the flying mantis was simply no match for him. In this wave of attacks, scyther only managed to resist for a minute or two before being surrounded by Jiang Ming and the other trainers' Pokémon and completely overwhelmed. And, taking this opportunity, Jiang Ming certainly didn't dare to waste any time. He quickly took the rope he had and headed towards the scyther, swiftly binding it up. The bound mantis was clearly panicked. Once completely restrained, it began to struggle nervously. Jiang Ming knew scyther was panicked, but to prevent the Pokémon from hurting anyone, he had no other choice. However, they had quite a few wounds on their bodies. Since scyther is not friendly, then the trainers CCFD who appear after scyther is tied up by them are not necessarily friendly either. Instead, they were a group of trainers who looked seriously injured. I came to this island to carry out a task assigned by my boss. Who are you? And the scyther is their spirit. If these trainers who appeared this time have malicious intentions, they can resist, but it will waste more time. They weren't particularly clear about the trainer's situation, but the fact that scyther had injured Golduck after appearing made Jiang Ming realize that scyther was definitely not a friendly Pokémon. This encounter gave them an impression of the people who entered the island, but the group of trainers that appeared before them were completely unfamiliar to them. To avoid getting hurt, Jiang Ming quickly ran towards the direction of the trainers. Zhang Tian, who was not very willing to trust these trainers, hesitated before taking out his weapon and turning to look at Jiang Ming. Tie them up first, then we'll talk. If the island hadn't sunk, then wasting more time wouldn't have been a big deal, since they would have had plenty of time to solve the problem. But things are different now because the attack from scyther made Jiang Ming realize that the trainers on the island were not of one mind. Normally, Jiang Ming would definitely not agree to such a request since such a thing is indeed quite hurtful. So even if it was impossible for them to stay put, they had no ability to resist, and in a short time they were tied up by Jiang Lu and the other trainers. The problem is that the island could sink at any moment and their tools have disappeared. Just when the tools disappeared, these trainers and Scyther appeared. The trainers who were tied up didn't try to be defiant. When they heard Jiang Ming's question, they immediately introduced themselves. Fortunately, this time it wasn't some dangerous spirit. Sensing that these trainers didn't mean any harm, Jiang Ming awkwardly rubbed his nose at their dejected appearance before asking the trainers in front of him with a slightly helpless look. Jiang Ming, surprised to learn from them that Scyther was their Pokémon, looked at them with growing wariness. Those trainers weren't particularly obedient. Seeing Jiang Ming approaching, they certainly couldn't stay put obediently. When they saw Jiang Ming gathered with the other trainers, the trainers' expressions stiffened for a moment. Upon hearing the sound, Jiang Ming immediately turned around abruptly with his elf. Like Jiang Ming and his group, they were also an organized team of trainers. Just then, I heard a sound. The trainers on Jiang Ming's side also had rather stiff expressions. After all, they had all come to this island together. Although they didn't meet at the beginning, they had all met 27 outside the island. It's difficult to trust trainers who aren't from their own group, especially in the current situation where it's even harder to trust them. The group of trainers who had been tied up probably knew they couldn't escape and immediately sat down on the spot with dejected expressions. They appeared this time simply because they heard the Scyther's voice, so they came out to check the situation. Jiang Ming, having no other choice but to let things continue this way, hung the Scyther on a tree before seriously planning to search the surrounding area with the other trainers. Because of the initial behavior of the Scyther, Jiang Ming was quite sensitive to sound. This proves that these trainees may not have been part of the same wave that brought them to the island. If Scyther hadn't hurt Golduck, Jiang Ming might have believed that statement, but Scyther's behavior was just too much for him to accept. Upon hearing this, Jiang Ming stopped what he was doing and looked at the trainer who had spoken with suspicion. Through his account, Jiang Ming learned that the Scyther had not been released at the beginning but had been protecting them closely. He suspected that these people had stolen their tools. So Jiang Ming remained extremely calm while listening to the trainer's words and didn't say anything. They weren't actually very clear about Golduck's situation because they didn't see Scyther attack Golduck. As for the attack by the flying mantis, we can also explain it. We don't know what happened. After arriving on this island, we encountered some enemy attacks. The enemies did not show their true faces, so we don't know what kind of enemies they are, but they are very strong. The trainers on Jiang Ming's side, who seemed somewhat reluctant to believe him, looked at him hesitantly and tried to have a friendly conversation with him. However, this close protection was clearly no match for attacks from enemies lurking in the shadows, leading to the trainers being attacked repeatedly in subsequent encounters. They looked at each other, clearly unsure whether to believe the trainers. Just as Jiang Ming, who was not really willing to believe them, was about to speak, one of the trainers quickly raised his hand and helplessly spoke to Jiang Ming. Under Jiang Ming's questioning gaze, the trainer didn't waste any time and quickly told him about his situation. However, after their anger subsided, the group did not take any drastic action at this point since they were not particularly aggressive. "Are you sure what you're saying is true?" Later, probably worried that if things continued like this, they would all be wiped out, so Scyther changed from close protection to taking the initiative to attack. Sensing Jiang Ming's wariness, the group of trainers who had just been boasting that Scyther was their Pokémon exchanged glances. "Please give me flowers!" Seeing that the trainer couldn't explain the current situation, Jiang Ming immediately began to seriously talk about the disappearance of the tools they had stored nearby. "We don't know what happened with Scyther, but we do know that Scyther hurt this Pokémon." The group of trainers who were suspected were clearly unhappy with Jiang Ming's suspicions, and they looked at him with some anger. Then one of the trainers gave a wry smile and spoke to Jiang Ming with a hint of helplessness. To avoid such a high cost, the group of trainers could only watch with a sense of grievance. Jiang Ming repeatedly explained that because of their injuries they had been staying nearby recently and had no way to hide the tools. Sensing the softened expressions of the trainers around him, Jiang Ming reluctantly began to inquire about the factory. You may think we are bad people just because Scyther looks very fierce, but we actually have no intention of harming any of the trainers here. One sentence made the trainer who was exchanging preview images freeze for a moment. With their current capabilities, it's impossible for them to harm Jiang Ming. If they were to take any particularly drastic action at this time, it could very well result in them paying a heavy price. However, they speculated that Scyther might have mistaken Golduck for one of the attackers, which is why it launched its attack at this time. It was a misunderstanding, and they were a little embarrassed by it, but there was nothing they could do about it. After all, the Scyther was protecting them, and they were just trying to save their own lives. The other trainers around Jiang Ming, seeing his attempt, silently moved their Golducks out and looked at the group of trainers in front of them with smiles. As they listened to their stories, the trainers around Jiang Ming gradually calmed down. Upon seeing this, the Scyther trainer rushed to Jiang Ming's side and nervously spoke to him. But just as they were observing, the Scyther was attacked. However, shortly after they landed on the island, their tools began to disappear one by one, preventing them from leaving the island. That group of trainers seemed to harbor great malice towards all trainers who landed on the island. If they cannot leave, they may have to rely on the elves to ensure their short-term survival. Trainers who arrive on the island at the beginning will have no chance of finding them on the island. Jiang Ming, who was originally planning to leave with the other trainers, was drawn to this sentence and quickly looked at the trainer seriously. Legend has it that a legendary spirit sleeps on this island and can only be seen when the island sinks. Left with no other option, they could only conduct their investigation on the island and inform their boss, asking him to join in the investigation as well. But unexpectedly, the bird actually started to sink just like the legend had said. At first, they didn't quite believe the trainer's malice since it was just a matter of lost tools and nothing else. So they were actually observing the situation regarding the information the boss had gathered. Because they had this mission, they knew quite a bit about the island, and they also knew that there was no one else on the island except for some trainers who were doing research. They actually arrived a few days earlier than Jiang Ming's group. Having learned the proof from them, Jiang Ming finally freed these trainers, much to his dismay. They came here because they had taken on a task from a boss who had learned about a legend from some book. The trainers who were questioned by Jiang Ming naturally dared not deny it, and they quickly began to produce all their evidence one after another. So the boss initially just treated those things as a little legend and didn't think much of it. There is indeed a group of trainers hiding here who are hostile to all trainers, and they know the island very well. As soon as they were freed, a group of trainers rushed towards Scyther. After all, since 753 already knows about the situation on this island, the most important thing now is to leave here as soon as possible so that we can investigate more things. Jiang Ming didn't care about their actions. Seeing them start to untie the flying mantis, he helplessly decided to continue looking for his own tools. Realizing that the island might really be as the legend said, their boss naturally didn't dare to waste time and almost without hesitation sent them directly to the island to investigate. Based on their investigation and that of their team, they preliminarily determined that another group of trainers was hiding on the island. We've been here for a while now, and although we can't be sure who's behind this, we have a general idea of what's going on. At first their boss didn't believe it. After all, since the existence of elves, there have been countless legends, big and small, but it was impossible to determine whether those legends were true or false. Fortunately, the Scyther was very clever. After being attacked, it immediately brought some information to them, letting them know that their boss's investigation was correct. Sensing Jiang Ming's seriousness, the trainer awkwardly touched his nose and then began to recount what they had learned. Therefore, they were not particularly wary of the island at first and felt that there was no danger on the island. Not wanting to go all the way, Jiang Ming and his group of trainers turned around and tried to run away. Using that understanding, they began launching attacks on other trainers, and their team was left battered and bruised as a result of these attacks. After all, although those wartortles were acting suspiciously, they clearly hadn't done anything particularly bad and they had more important things to do on their end. However, Blastoise remained very calm and kept making some sounds to soothe Wartstork. There's nothing else besides that. It's unclear what Wartortle and Blastoise were communicating about, but the group of Wartortles seemed quite indignant and kept cursing. The group of Carmigator turtles clearly hadn't seen Jiang Ming. They were looking around furtively as if they were doing something shady. Therefore, at Jiang Ming's request, these trainers quickly organized themselves. Jiang Ming's expression instantly turned serious as he was surprised to learn such useful information from these trainers before leaving. Jiang Ming followed them at a distance of about half an hour, and just as he was wondering whether he should directly attack the wartortles in front of him finally stopped their group activity. After cautiously checking the surroundings to make sure there were no trainers or Pokémon nearby, the group of Carmage began to move cautiously in one direction. Although they each have their own ulterior motives, most of them do not harbor any ill will towards other trainers. Seeing his companion's posture, Jiang Ming looked around but did not stop the trainers. Instead, he began to ask the Scyther trainer for details. Standing some distance away, Jiang Ming calmly watched the sneaky warbler come and go. Just as the warbler was about to disappear, he quickly followed with his Pokémon. Now that they have a common enemy, there is no need for them to separate at this time. Under these circumstances, there's no need for him to stay here and waste time. Jiang Ming, who was observing Blastoise's situation from the sidelines, listened calmly to 23 for a while. Because he couldn't understand what the Pokémon was saying, Jiang Ming had no choice but to stand up and leave with his Pokémon. After walking for a while, the Jengar beside Jiang Ming quickly floated forward. Other trainers also began to gather together as a result. Because he was worried that the wary wartortles would discover him, Jiang Ming kept a safe distance from them. Unable to obtain any new information, Jiang Ming had no choice but to send his companions in small groups to investigate various places. They came here only to find treasure. However, just as Jiang Ming turned to leave with his Pokémon, a group of chattering wartortles suddenly looked at him. As Jengar finished its movement, Jiang Ming saw a group of wartortles appear in front of him. They are more likely to cause damage when they are grouped together. Jiang Ming quickly found cover to conceal himself and stopped moving, looking in the direction of Camille. In the water was a Blastoise they had already seen and fought before. 22 Unfortunately, Scyther's trainers don't know much. So in the end, all Jiang Ming could do was know that there was a group of malicious trainers eyeing them covetously. Seeing that the trainers had gradually organized themselves and left Jiang Ming's side without wasting any time, he took out his Pokémon and began to move in the direction he had planned. The water gun attack wasn't particularly serious. Jiang Ming only felt like he was splashed with water, but otherwise he was fine. A water cannon suddenly attacked Jiang Ming. Fortunately, the other trainers also knew that they had to find out the truth as soon as possible. Upon closer inspection, Jiang Ming realized that Wartortle was currently near the water. After swimming a distance, Blastoise stopped and looked at Jiang Ming. Based on this guess, Jiang Ming pondered for a while before finally leading his Pokémon in the direction Blastoise was guiding him. There are many human-built structures in this area, and some small human stalls can be seen in the open spaces. But even if there are no other problems, it doesn't mean Jiang Ming will tolerate it with a good temper. However, since the matter on the island is the most important thing right now, even though the situation here is a bit strange, what Jiang Ming Wang Minju finds even stranger is why Blastoise brought him here. A moment later, Jiang Ming heard a cracking sound, but those who were prepared to stay here indefinitely should have disappeared a long time ago. The group of wartortles were clearly no match for Jiang Ming's Pokémon. Under Jiang Ming's actions, the group of wartortles was quickly defeated and scattered. However, after this gathering, the group of wartortles stopped attacking Jiang Ming and instead pointed anxiously at the Blastoise next to them. Just as Jiang Ming was looking at Blastoise with a puzzled expression, Blastoise began to slowly swim forward. While Jiang Ming was filled with doubt, Blastoise tapped a spot in a bit of a hurry. Jiang Ming, who didn't really want to do anything to these wartortles in the first place, walked over to them with a mix of amusement and exasperation. It's even less likely that they've set up any buying and selling stalls here. Just then, the group of caramel fish following closely behind quickly ran towards Jiang Ming. 1,014,402,422, Feilu 220,152,330. Moreover, those people must have been prepared to stay here for a long time, otherwise there would be no need to make these things that are not normally used. Having a basic understanding of the place, Jiang Ming calmly observed his surroundings and then glanced over to report. The action was so obvious that even though Jiang Ming couldn't understand what the Pokémon was saying, he could clearly tell from the gesture that Blastoise was trying to guide him to a certain place. If Blastoise has already done this, it proves that this Pokémon has discovered something important that only humans can help with. After all, they don't yet know the specific situation on this island, and everything on the island is quite important to them. Upon seeing Blastoise stop moving, Jiang Ming immediately shifted his focus to check the surrounding situation. These stalls must have been unused for a long time as they were covered in dust. Then it suddenly pounced on the spot where Blastoise had struck. Jiang Ming, somewhat confused about Blastoise's situation, calmly observed the Pokémon. These everyday items are enough to show that a group of people must have lived here before. If things were normal and there weren't any major problems on the island, Jiang Ming would actually be quite curious about it and might even start investigating things there. Upon closer inspection, Jiang Ming realized that this was an area they hadn't investigated since arriving on the island. He immediately threw his elf out. Just then, the group of Kamais who had been beaten to a pulp suddenly regrouped. The entire island began to slowly sink. Jiang Ming, who initially thought the Wartortles were playing a prank, hesitated for a moment after seeing their actions and then turned his gaze to Blastoise. The two walked and stopped intermittently. Just when Jiang Ming was getting a little impatient and had no idea where Blastoise was taking him, Blastoise finally stopped. Next to the stall were some everyday items scattered around. They had a conflict with Blastoise before, and Blastoise wouldn't have done this unless it was necessary. Jiang Ming, who had no idea what Blastoise was up to, hesitated for a moment but did not refuse Blastoise at this time. The water was clearly not a suitable battlefield for them. It's not entirely foolish of them to learn from Jiang Ming that there's an area that can directly interfere with a group of trainers on an entire island. Because of the island's legends, most trainers dare not take the risk. After his initial displeasure, Blastoise reluctantly lifted up the injured researchers and trainers who couldn't stay in the water for long, as Jiang Ming had requested. It let out a low growl and then began to march toward Jiang Ming. It seems this place is the key area that can interfere with the island. If they CCFH still want to find that area, they need to dive directly underwater. Fortunately, the other trainers were all extremely perceptive. When they realized something was wrong, they began to search for their companions one after another. Fortunately, Blastoise realized the consequences of its actions, so it didn't continue its malicious behavior towards Jiang Ming upon seeing him arrive. Unfortunately, he found out far too late. These trainers are still injured. If it weren't for your actions, they wouldn't be in the water. To make up for your mistakes, I suggest you take care of these trainers for a while. As a group of trainers who fight on land, they dare not assist in areas where it is not their strength. Jiang Ming, who had previously been unaware of Blastoise's situation, finally understood why this Pokémon had led him here. Unfortunately, after running for a while, the entire island sank completely. In addition, due to the injuries they have experienced, they are now wary of most trainers. Although the island is gradually sinking due to this interference, now that the important area has been found, they can completely bring the island back from there. Jiang Ming didn't seem to care about the trainer's suspicions. He simply pushed them aside and spoke seriously to Blastoise. Watching the island slowly sinking, Jiang Ming glanced at Blastoise with a headache, then turned and quickly ran towards the other trainers. Because most of the trainers were gathered together and there were many people, Jiang Ming was able to find them quickly. Because of this, a group of trainers who had originally planned to find that area and take control of the island could only float stiffly on the seawater. The group of trainers who were inexplicably pushed were a little flustered. After all, these injured trainers did not initially see Jiang Ming as their companion. Jiang Ming, speechless, could only start swimming towards Blastoise, clearly seeing why the trainers were frozen in place. If they weren't forced to, they would never have stayed with Jiang Ming. Sensing Blastoise's embarrassment, Jiang Ming, taking advantage of Blastoise's swimming approach, quickly pushed the injured trainers from their team in front of Blastoise. After all, there is indeed a treasure in the legend, but it depends on whether they are lucky enough to get it. Jiang Ming's requirements are clearly a bit too high for Blastoise. Excited to have the ability to control the island, they began to run in the direction Jiang Ming had indicated. But Blastoise is probably a relatively kind Pokémon, even though it fought fiercely with Jiang Ming and the trainers behind him at the beginning. However, after realizing that the problem was indeed its own, the relatively kind Blastoise angrily sprayed a water gun at Jiang Ming. Now that they're together, all they can think about is that Jiang Ming might do something to them. But then, Jiang Ming pulled this stunt, which makes it hard for them not to be suspicious. Without having to spend time on these trainers, Jiang Ming found the researchers and the injured trainers one after another before quickly telling them about Blastoise. The trainers Jiang Ming asked to train were basically fearless. After all, if they were truly afraid of trouble, they wouldn't have come to this island to take the risk. But now things are different. The island has sunk, and everyone has to stay on the water. It would indeed be difficult for them to find humans on the island, because the island is well concealed in various ways, including some forests and human-built structures. After confirming that the Blastoise posed little threat, Jiang Ming immediately turned to look around. No matter how familiar they are with the water, their body shape will be completely visible on the surface. However, this time, Jiang Ming, the commander, did not intend to have Dragonair directly attack the trainers but instead wanted to check on their situation. Jiang Ming assumed that the other party wouldn't act rashly if they weren't sure about their situation. Just then, Hakron used his speed to return to Jiang Ming's side. Sensing their hostility, Jiang Ming hesitated for a moment before releasing Riolu, then turned to look at the other trainers around him. As soon as Dragonair was thrown out, Jiang Ming directed it to head towards the trainers. At the same time, the group of trainers who were cursing and swearing also noticed Jiang Ming. When they saw Jiang Ming looking at them, the trainers immediately became wary and slowly took out their weapons. It seems the other side is indeed very hostile. The moment Riolu returns, you should immediately throw out your Pokémon to surround and attack the other side. We don't need to actually beat the other side into a pulp. Our goal is to trap the other side and prevent it from attacking us. Therefore, Jiang Ming no longer needed to search. He easily found a group of trainers floating on the water in the south, cursing and swearing. But it was clear that Jiang Ming had overestimated the other party's intelligence. Seeing that these people were taking action, Jiang Ming wasted no time and quickly threw the Hakron forward. Jiang Ming was not flustered because he knew that Hakron possessed high-speed movement capabilities. Otherwise, it could easily cause unnecessary misunderstandings. Jiang Ming, who had only intended to test Blastoise's attitude, chuckled, having already confirmed Blastoise's situation in his mind. Although the other party seemed very hostile, Jiang Ming did not intend to make a move until he had a clear understanding of their situation. With this cover, the humans could easily hide anywhere, and as long as they knew the island well, other outsiders wouldn't be able to find them. His strategy was to use high-speed movement as a signal whenever Hakron encountered a problem, so he could know whether the other party was friend or foe. A dozen or so Pokémon that could only be used in water rushed out. The group of trainers who had been unsure of what to do just moments before almost instinctively began to obey Jiang Ming's words. Fortunately, Jiang Ming, who arranged for Hakron to go out, had already told Hakron to be vigilant beforehand. Therefore, seeing that Dragonair was rapidly approaching them using its high-speed movement, Jiang Ming immediately raised his hand to the group of trainers behind him and spoke seriously. Just when he thought both sides could have a friendly exchange, the Hakurin he had sent out was attacked by the trainer's Pokémon as soon as it arrived in front of them. As soon as it returned, the group of trainers behind Jiang Ming immediately gave a command. Therefore, upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, the group of trainers immediately nodded in agreement. Although Blastoise's appearance was abrupt, the Pokémon was not in any danger, nor was it truly opposed to him. At Jiang Ming's request, they released their water-evolving sprites without hesitation. Therefore, Hakron was very alert when attacked. He reacted almost the instant he was attacked and quickly moved at high speed in the water. Since the other side already knows the current situation on the island, it proves that they have likely prepared quite a few Pokémon that can be used in the water. I suggest you release all the Pokémon that can attack in the water. Watching the Magikarp leaping excitedly in front of all the other Pokémon, Jiang Ming silently took out his Pokéball. The Piquet ball landed on Blastos' back, and Magikarp, which was inside, was accidentally released. Watching Magikarp hop and leap directly towards the enemy and then wildly flick its tail, the trainers, who dared not count on Magikarp at all, whispered to Jiang Ming with a headache. He wanted to gamble on whether Magikarp could successfully ambush and defeat a Pokémon at this moment, and then use this opportunity to evolve. Unexpectedly, even though they had no further requests, Jiang Ming actually brought out Magikarp. Knowing that Magikarp couldn't help trainers in battle, they didn't ask Jiang Ming to pull out the Magikarp when they first saw it on him. Fortunately, Magikarp is a bit slow and can't understand some of the words, but it can still understand the general movements. But he had no interest in recalling Magikarp at this time. At the same time that Jiang Ming's dozen or so Pokémon rushed out, the group of trainers on the other side also took out the Pokémon they could use in the water. Some trainers around, who were still focused on their own Pokémon, looked at Jiang Ming with a mixture of amusement and exasperation at Magikarp's actions. Jiang Ming could actually understand what he meant, so seeing the slightly tense look in his eyes, Jiang Ming chuckled and nodded understandingly. The surrounding Pokémon were still fighting and Magikarp had already been released. Although Jiang Ming felt that even if Magikarp was released, it wouldn't be of much use. However, after a short time, the waters began to boil due to the attacks from the underwater spirits of both sides. Before a Gyarados is fully trained, Magikarp is really not very useful and cannot help the trainer in battle at all. But since Magikarp has already appeared, this battle can be considered a gamble for him. Jiang Ming, who didn't dare to expect Magikarp to understand, quickly pointed to the action. He didn't actually intend for Magikarp to come out and fight before it was defeated. Most trainers who catch Magikarp only hope to raise it into Gyarados. This statement was actually quite tactful. What he really meant was that Magikarp could very well be harmed in such an environment. Go and fight alongside those elves. Jiang Ming's action caused Magikarp to change direction and charge directly towards the group of trainers on the other side. With a gambling mentality in mind, Jiang Ming stared intently at the group of elves ahead. Under Jiang Ming's watchful gaze, Magikarp nimbly jumped around, but it didn't hit any Pokémon or hurt anyone. Just as Jiang Ming had initially judged, it was truly useless. Just as things were getting heated, Jiang Ming suddenly felt that one of the Piquet balls on his body had gone empty. He quickly glanced in the direction of the Piquet ball and realized that in the midst of the chaotic attack, some Pokémon had accidentally knocked down the Piquet ball containing his Magikarp. As soon as it was released, the Magikarp jumped into the water, but it must be said that Magikarp has indeed honed its dodging skills. Therefore, he had no choice but to put away the Piquet ball and then give commands to Magikarp. The silly Magikarp stared calmly at Jiang Ming as if it couldn't hear what Jiang Ming was saying, but after nodding, Jiang Ming did not intend to recall Magikarp at this time. Let's recall Magikarp. This Pokémon seems too dull, and it might not be able to improve its performance in such a dangerous battle. Under this power, no Pokémon could actually harm Magikarp. It seems he must have lost his mind to choose to let Magikarp show off at this crucial moment. We should definitely take the upcoming battles seriously. Just as Jiang Ming took out a Piquet ball to try and recall Magikarp, a Staryu suddenly dashed towards Magikarp. Magikarp, still frantically wagging its tail, stared blankly at Staryu coming towards it, and was kicked away by Staryu without even being able to resist. Completely surprised by the unexpected turn of events just as he was about to recall Magikarp, Jiang Ming was stunned for a moment before quickly heading to Magikarp to release a Piquet ball. Unfortunately, his move was unsuccessful. Just as he threw the Piquet ball, Staryu attacked Magikarp again. At the same time, Staryu's trainer with a grim expression commanded Staryu, "Give it a good beating. How dare this trainer bring out such a Pokémon to battle us? This trainer is simply looking down on me." As the attacks from the side he described as looking down on the starfish grew increasingly fierce. With virtually no ability to retaliate, Magikarp could only hop away in an attempt to escape the rapid attacks. As Magikarp hopped and ran, Jianglu had no way to accurately recall it back into its Piquet ball. Aside from not being able to recall Magikarp into its Piquet ball, he could only watch helplessly as Magikarp foolishly drifted further and further away from him. The trainers who had already been paying attention to Magikarp looked at the silly Magikarp and Jiang Ming, who could only helplessly soak in the water nearby, and immediately raised their hands to pat Jiang Ming on the shoulder with sympathy. Owning a shiny Magikarp is something many people envy. They originally thought Jiang Ming's shiny Magikarp would evolve into a shiny Gyarados. Thinking about the abilities of the shiny Gyarados, even though they had indeed been helped by Jiang Ming and shouldn't have any negative feelings towards him, they were still even more jealous. Things are different now. They no longer need to be jealous because Jiang Ming's shiny Magikarp is about to disappear. The pitiful situation made them feel both sympathy and relief. Jiang Ming, who had no idea what their mentality was, slapped their hands away in disgust and had no interest in their attempts to comfort him. He glared angrily at the Magikarp not far away, watching it grow farther and farther away under his gaze, while Staryu also grew farther and farther away at the same time. Jiang Ming then spoke to Dragonair, who was still fighting. Go and bring the Magikarp back. The Hakuren, who was still locked in fierce combat, was clearly extremely obedient. Just a second ago, they were locked in a fierce battle with other Pokémon, and the surrounding water began to swirl due to the fight between the two Pokémon. But as soon as Jiang Ming made his request, this back and forth stopped instantly. Hakron quickly submerged into the water and disappeared from everyone's sight. The group of trainers who had initially felt some sympathy for Jiang Ming immediately withdrew their hands upon seeing Hakuryu's extremely obedient posture. Then one of the trainers, his face full of jealousy, asked, "Why are your Pokémon so obedient?" 33 Their Pokémon aren't disobedient. After all, most of the Pokémon they bring here to help in battle have undergone training. No matter how much a trained Pokémon has its own ideas, it generally cannot cooperate with its trainer. However, no matter how well they cooperate with their trainers, those Pokémon still have their own little tempers. At least those elves could never be as readily available and at will as Jiang Ming's elves. Seeing how obedient Hakron was, the trainers in the group were filled with envy. Unexpectedly, Jiang Ming coughed and said disdainfully, "That's just because your affinity with your elves isn't high enough." To avoid this situation, Jiang Ming quickly took out a Pokéball and aimed it at Magikarp. Jiang Ming never expected that Golduck, who was recovering from its injuries, would suddenly appear at this time. If they have companions who can solve the problem of them being constantly submerged in water, they will have a greater advantage in defeating the enemy. The group of trainers who were directing their Pokémon in battle looked at Golduck with disbelief. The elf remained quietly recuperating in the corner. Jiang Ming, who was already having second thoughts about whether Magikarp could survive, sighed and looked ahead. If it's lost, there's no way to find it anywhere else. This is the shimmering Carp King that he painstakingly dug out from the secret realm of Dongting Lake. At the same time as they spoke, Magikarp and Dragonair, who had been drifting further and further away, rejoined the battle. You can't continue fighting either, and the battle is at a stalemate. If things really come to a head, why don't you take advantage of this time to see if you can bring the island back? Blastoise was already showing great mercy by helping Jiang Ming lift up these injured and incapacitated trainers and researchers. How could it possibly be willing to take these trainers back to shore with it? While it's true that making Magikarp exceptionally safe is a bit difficult given Magikarp's tendency to act recklessly, it's generally impossible to keep it safe under normal circumstances. Because Golduck was injured, Jiang Ming did not throw Golduck away immediately, even when he needed to fight the enemy. Then he decided not to continue his reckless behavior since his earlier actions had almost cost him Magikarp. But he believed that Magikarp should be able to survive under the protection of Dragonair. In that case, let's stop researching how to make the island float. You and Blastoise go back to shore and paddle. Unfortunately, Blastoise has never been a trainer's Pokémon, so it will never listen to any trainer. There are human cities there, and when they return there, they can prepare more tools to help Jiang Ming and his group. Seeing that both Crocodile King and Hakron were fine, while Staryu, which had been chasing Crocodile King, was having some problems, Jiang Ming breathed a sigh of relief. Unfortunately, the battle scene was too chaotic and Jiang Ming was still unable to recall Magikarp. Just then, a familiar Pokémon appeared before everyone. It was none other than Golduck, which had been injured by Scyther earlier. For ordinary people like Jiang Ming, being constantly submerged in water is quite a tiring experience. In the end, he could only helplessly shout at Dragonair, "Try to protect Magikarp." Golduck's injuries are quite severe. If left unattended, will this Pokémon die? Even if Jiang Ming hadn't said these words, the researchers would have understood. After their initial disbelief, they began to nervously focus their attention on Jiang Ming. This is only the second time we've experienced something like this, and we have absolutely no research experience. It's really unlikely that our research will be successful. Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, the group of researchers who were conducting the study immediately wiped the sweat from their brows and looked at Jiang Ming helplessly. The researchers Jiang Ming had asked weren't fools. Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, they almost immediately realized what he meant. Jiang Ming had actually guessed it was impossible. Seeing that Golduck was close to the battle and had secured a place on the battlefield, Jiang Ming couldn't help but speak up nervously. They looked at each other for a moment, then decided not to dwell on the matter with Jiang Ming any longer and instead began to earnestly negotiate with Blastoise. This shore could not possibly be the small island, but rather the shore opposite the small island. Jiang Ming chuckled, surprised that these trainers actually cared about Golduck's life, and quickly spoke to the researchers still on Blastoise's back. To use such words to deceive an elf, your behavior is utterly despicable. The situation has reached a stalemate. However, unlike other trainers who wanted to discuss things properly with Blastoise, he didn't intend to discuss things properly with Blastoise when he came to Blastoise's side. Seeing that Jiang Ming had actually managed to coax Blastoise to their side and even get it to do things for him, their already unpleasant expressions became even more grim. Feeling annoyed by the slaps Jiang Ming had given him, he didn't think much of it when he saw the sugar water arrow turtle that Jiang Ming suddenly offered. Because those trainers could almost immediately tell that the people on the other side clearly had some ulterior motives, which was why they did this on purpose. Then the threat became more serious. Blastoise, who was already unhappy about this, became even angrier after hearing Jiang Ming's words. Having been fooled by Jiang Ming, it readily agreed to the conditions Jiang Ming offered. When Jiang Ming uttered those words with a harmonious attitude, Blastoise felt satisfied. Therefore, mentally mature trainers will generally feel uncomfortable because of this kind of behavior from the other person. Actually, we can cooperate. You know how important this is for us right now, and you wouldn't want to stand by those people on the other side and help them fight us, would you? Seeing that the time was almost up and that the trainers around him were getting annoyed by his attitude, Jiang Ming smiled and changed his tone, speaking to Blastoise. Then it's a pleasure to cooperate. I hope you can get these trainers ashore as soon as possible. In return, we will repay you through time and space. The trainers on the other side, who were soaking in the water, didn't look too good when they were battling Jiang Ming's Pokémon. If you continue to be this aggressive, I don't mind giving up the fight with the other side right now and having the elves come over here to take care of you. It must be said that this threat was quite effective. Jiang Ming didn't explain the specifics of the matter directly, but rather allowed Blastoise to make its own decisions. The Blastoise, somewhat satisfied, tapped the water around it. Although it didn't seem willing to obey, its attitude had at least improved a lot. Jiang Ming, who had already guessed that Blastoise would agree to his conditions, smiled with satisfaction and then quickly pointed in a certain direction. The Blastoise, which had been unwilling to communicate just moments before, began to glare angrily at Jiang Ming under this threat, and then splashed water nearby. Jiang Ming, who was still watching the battle ahead, saw the stalemate and glanced at the trainers around him, who all looked helpless and frustrated. He quickly went to Blastoise's side. Once Jiang Ming realized that Blastoise's attitude was starting to recover, he grinned and said he could help Blastoise accomplish something. Under Jiang Ming's forceful command, the dazed Blastoise, still somewhat confused, suddenly darted towards the shore with the group of trainers and researchers on its back. However, Blastoise isn't a mature trainer. This Pokémon CCFB may seem mature, but it's actually no match for a mischievous human. Instead, he immediately took out a Pokéball and glared fiercely at Blastoise. We have so many Pokémon here. If we really can't beat them, we'll have all of them come back and swarm you to take you down first. Jiang Ming had no time to coax Blastoise. Seeing the Pokémon's confused expression, he quickly gave another command. Because Blastoise was unwilling, none of the trainers who tried to persuade it were able to convince it. The water splashes around them grew even larger because of Blastoise's extremely angry posture. Seeing that Blastoise was finally showing signs of wanting to communicate, Jiang Ming nodded in satisfaction. The slap and then sweet treat approach is really not very effective for some shrewd and experienced trainers. They were extremely resentful, gritting their teeth because they couldn't gain Blastoise's approval, so they ultimately chose to morally condemn Jiang Ming's side. Blastoise, who had inexplicably become a friendly partner with Jiang Ming, looked at him with a dazed expression. Unfortunately, moral condemnation is not very useful for a mature trainer. Just then, a cry rang out from the sky, but there was indeed some blood on his body. The trainer who had just condemned Jiang Ming was now directing his Pokémon to counterattack, his eyes fixed intently on the Dragonair protected by Magikarp. Although he knew that the other party's words were highly morally manipulative, Jiang Ming had no morals whatsoever. He knew perfectly well that the trainers weren't actually interested in seeing any difference. They simply knew that the shiny Dragonair belonged to him, so they started to harm it. Since they are destined not to become their elves, there's no need to dwell on it too much at this point. Seeing the trainer's excitement, Jiang Ming smiled helplessly, then said coldly, "You stay here, I'll think of a way to attack those trainers on the other side. I want to see what the difference is between a shiny Dragonair and a regular Dragonair." He will only focus on making his elves intensify their attacks. Seeing that Dragonair wasn't causing any trouble at this time, Jiang Ming took a breath and quickly took out his Piquet ball. The sudden attack caught all the trainers off guard. Before it evolved, the shiny Dragonair wasn't significantly different from the regular Dragonair. "We can't let this drag on any longer. Our spirits and our bodies may not be able to withstand the onslaught of the seawater now." A large bird suddenly appeared in the sky and launched an attack directly at the Hakron in midair. Seeing that Jiang Ming couldn't break through no matter what methods he used, the trainers breathed a sigh of relief and didn't want to continue discussing Blastoise with him. But now that Jiang Ming has said it, the trainers are still very excited. At least they don't have to wait until they can't hold on any longer to talk about it. "We can't just let the shiny Riolu we painstakingly discovered go to waste here. The scales on a Dragonair are quite hard, and thanks to these hard scales, the Dragonair doesn't suffer much damage. I never expected that after losing the argument, the other party would choose to attack the little sprite. If they really succeed in killing him, Jiang Mingbian might lose an extremely useful Pokémon." So, seeing that the group of trainers started attacking Dragonair, Jiang Ming swam while shouting to Magikarp, "Throw Dragonair this way to me. Please give me flowers. We're all human. If they can't withstand it, then the trainers on the other side might not be able to either." Magikarp naturally obeyed. At Jiang Ming's request, it immediately swung its tail and threw Dragonair towards Jiang Ming. Seeing the injured Riolu, Jiang Ming spoke to the trainers around him with some annoyance. Even if Jiang Ming didn't say it now, they would definitely tell him in a few minutes that they couldn't hold on any longer. He then quickly took out a Piquet ball and swam wildly towards Dragonair. Some trainers, shivering from being in the sea for so long, nodded to Jiang Ming. They launched a strong counterattack. He then quickly retreated and checked on Hakron's condition. Seeing that Hakron was still completely clueless, the Chen family member who was in charge of training sneered. Jiang Ming, realizing what was happening, quickly took the opportunity to recall Dragonair back into its Piquet ball. After all, whether or not Jiang Ming can deceive that elf, it will not stand on their side. Normally, Dragonair is dull and doesn't have many opinions, but it obediently stopped in place after Magikarp's action. Jiang Ming, suddenly interrupted by the change of topic, stared speechlessly at the trainer in front of him. The group of trainers following Jiang Ming stared wide-eyed, about to point at the Pokémon. Just as they were feeling overwhelmed, the Golduck behind them fired a water gun at them. Just as they were excitedly launching their attack on Jiang Ming suddenly shouted behind the group of trainers, "Golduck, I'm counting on you from now on." Without the help of the elves, they floated in the water, initially angry but later panicked. Jiang Ming's initial resentment towards Golduck for not leaving with Blastoise eased with this help, and he solemnly commanded Golduck to launch an attack on the group of trainers. Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, they immediately realized that Jiang Ming clearly intended to deal with their group by himself. Later, because he was focused on fighting, Jiang Ming always thought that Golduck might have left and didn't pay much attention to it. Jiang Ming reacted quickly. Just as the group of trainers were about to speak, he abruptly stopped them from speaking in a serious tone. He never expected that Golduck would sneak up behind the group of trainers while they were discussing something. When Jiang Ming uttered the words 537, the group of trainers in front of him had been watching him closely. Unfortunately, their desperate desire was of no use. Once they released those elves one after another and they fought against each other with other elves, it was destined that they would never return. Because Golduck was injured, Jiang Ming originally planned to find a way to get Golduck to leave with Blastoise, since injured Pokémon usually can't help them solve their problems. Those trainers who firmly believed that an individual's abilities were limited simply ignored Jiang Ming's and the other trainers' actions, and happily planned to launch an attack on Jiang Ming. The water gun attack wasn't particularly fierce, but for them, it was the final straw that broke the camel's back. By then, Jiang Ming might not be their match, but it must be said that Golduck's behavior did indeed bring great help to Jiang Ming. However, if Jiang Ming were to deal with them alone, they would be a group of people ganging up on him. They began to feel increasingly powerless. This is none other than Golduck, which was previously injured by Scyther. Because Golducks are adept at moving underwater and living in water, they don't experience any physical problems from spending too much time in the water. If the delay goes on for too long, they will definitely be unable to continue their actions due to the postponement. Realizing that Jiang Ming's plan might leave them with no way to resist, the group of trainers wished they could summon all their Pokémon back right now to deal with Jiang Ming. All the trainers were delighted because if Jiang Ming continued to be with the other trainers, given their large numbers, they wouldn't be able to deal with him in the short term. Just when Jiang Ming thought that even the opposing trainer might not be able to withstand the attack, a Pokémon suddenly appeared stealthily behind the trainer. As Jiang Ming finished speaking, the sprite that had been sneaking around and heading towards the group of trainers suddenly appeared in front of everyone. But they are different. As humans, their bodies are not suited to being in the water. Under these circumstances, Golduck may not be able to launch a strong attack on them, but they can certainly buy time. No matter how clever or resourceful a person is, their abilities are limited. The trainers, who initially thought they had a chance, turned pale after being attacked by Golduck. They were simply no match for a Pokémon like Golduck. Next, all you need to do is stall those trainers' Pokémon. The group of trainers who were already on high alert suddenly looked toward the source of the sound. They initially thought it was an enemy, but to their surprise, they found Blastoise standing in front of them. Taking advantage of this surprise attack, they wanted to turn the tide of the battle. 22 Just as the group of trainers were thinking, a series of splashing sounds suddenly came from not far away, followed by the sound of water being cut. Seeing Jiang Ming entangled with the group of trainers, while Golduck under Jiang Ming's command harassed the trainers in various ways, their eyes lit up. However, Blastoise didn't seem to resist as much and actually followed Jiang Ming's instructions back to the shore. It even managed to grab a lot of tools from the shore and return here. Jiang Ming, who was very insistent on his ideas, ignored Zhang Tian's words and continued to entangle with the group of trainers. Unfortunately, he didn't plan to waste time arguing with Zhang Tian about those things. Jiang Ming, who was still planning to get entangled with those trainers, naturally heard Zhang Tian's words. They then quickly took control of the tools brought by Blastoise. After one of the trainers grabbed the last kayak, the trainer closest to Jiang Ming said to him, "Come back, let's go back to shore first." The group of trainers, who had been tense, instantly lost their nerve when they saw the change in the battle. They could only quickly lead their Pokémon back to the shore as Jiang Ming had instructed, while shouting to him, "We'll come back and take you back." Blastoise was inexplicably fooled by Jiang Ming and returned to shore with a group of injured researchers and trainers. His expression was serious. "I hope you don't know." Their physical condition was already much worse than before, and under the attack of these water guns they felt their bodies swaying precariously. They then excitedly began directing their own Pokémon to launch surprise attacks on the trainers' Pokémon. Hearing Zhang Tian's words and seeing Jiang Ming still stubbornly persisting, the other trainers on the kayaks felt a little nervous. The trainers who were following Jiang Ming were initially worried that Jiang Ming wouldn't be able to solve the problem. All he knew was that if he didn't keep these trainers occupied, the other trainers wouldn't be able to get back to shore in the short term. Instead, they would have to stay on the water and fight with these trainers. In comparison, it would actually be the most cost-effective approach to let these trainers return to shore and then have him use Dragonair's abilities to return to shore as well. After all, Jiang Ming had clearly held off the entire trainer group single-handedly, so they naturally couldn't let Jiang Lu hold them back. Hearing the trainer's words, he smiled and waved to them, "Take your Pokémon back to shore first." The trainer's eyes lit up at Blastoise's unexpected promise, and they quickly rushed towards it. This cost-effectiveness made Jiang Ming stick to his idea. Therefore, seeing that the other trainers were about to do as Jiang Ming said, he quickly said to Jiang Ming, "You have been leading us recently. I admit that you are very strong, but you are still young. Sometimes you are too young and arrogant. There are some things that you don't have to bear alone." He could understand why Zhang Tian had this misunderstanding. And at this time, the trainer's Pokémon returned to their side. Just as they were panicking and wondering whether to insist that Jiang Ming return to the kayak, their sprites began to return to their side one after another. Zhang Tian looked at Jiang Ming with a face full of surprise, never expecting that Jiang Ming would not make a decision after returning to the shore under such circumstances. He understood why Zhang Tian had mentioned his youthful arrogance. Jiang Ming, who was entangled with the group of trainers, actually knew that their chances of winning had already been realized when Blastoise returned. Having received their voices, Jiang Ming glanced at them calmly, not caring whether they would return or not. Jiang Ming has never been the kind of person who would sacrifice himself for others, and he certainly wouldn't stay here obediently to cover their retreat as they thought. Jiang Ming chose to stay in this place simply because he had a better solution. So even if those trainers don't come back, it doesn't really matter to him. He has the ability to solve this. Because he had the ability to solve the problem, Jiang Ming remained completely calm even when surrounded by several trainers and their Pokémon. Instead, he took out a Pokéball and addressed the goblin behind the trainers. "Would you like to enter my Pokéball?" The duck, which was attacking the group of trainers, paused for a moment, seemingly not expecting Jiang Ming to try to capture it at this time. Jiang Ming could understand the Pokémon's confusion at having stopped moving because of his sudden thought jump. He was patient, and while Golduck looked completely bewildered, he solemnly explained to Golduck while holding a Pokéball. "Your wounds are quite serious and won't heal in a short time. Besides, you've been fighting for so long, you must be exhausted. I'm leaving here soon and won't be able to take care of you. Plus, being exhausted at this point might cause you some trouble." Jiang Ming didn't explain the specifics of the trouble too clearly, as he didn't have time to elaborate. But Jiang Ming knew perfectly well that Golduck would understand what he meant. Sure enough, right after Jiang Ming finished explaining, Golduck, who hadn't known what Jiang Ming was thinking, instantly understood his idea. It nodded gently at Jiang Ming. Sensing that Golduck was willing to enter his Pokéball, Jiang Ming quickly took out a Pokéball and threw it at Golduck, saying to it, "After this is over, if you don't want to leave with me, I'll let you go." It's unclear whether Gothamin heard this or not. Jiang Ming only saw his Pokéball hit Chidar. The time ball vibrated a few times after hitting Golduck, then returned to calm. Jiang Ming, not bothered to wonder whether Duck had heard him or not, looked at the calm Pokéball, immediately put it away and quickly headed towards Dragonair. Hakron, who had fought countless battles, instantly understood what Jiang Ming was planning when he saw Jiang Ming's action. It suddenly charged towards Jiang Ming, sweeping away the trainers around it who had already exhausted their energy. With the help of Hakar, Jiang Ming quickly swam a distance toward the shore before turning back to look at Hakar again. Hakron moved quickly. While Jiang Ming was marching forward, Hakron was helping Jiang Jin remove the interference from the surrounding training monsters and Pokémon. Seeing that Jiang Ming was waiting for it, the Hakron, which had helped Jiang Ming remove obstacles, quickly charged towards Jiang Ming. The human and the elf quickly swam to a place relatively close to the shore by taking this opportunity to stop and swim. Jiang Ming was just an ordinary human being, and swimming this far was already his limit. Therefore, Jiang Ming, who had just swum to this point, stopped and looked at the group of trainers who were clearly nearing their limit and unable to continue swimming. He then smiled and spoke to Dragonair, "I'm counting on you from now on." As Jiang Ming finished speaking, the Hackerosaurus swam towards him, wrapped its body around him, and then let out a cry. After that, Jiang Ming felt as if he was being dragged by something. He didn't need to move anymore, he just needed to quietly let the thing dragging him forward. This time, the movement was incredibly fast. While the other trainers were finding new tools and trying to get into the water to rescue Jiang Ming, Hackeron had already used its incredible speed to drag Jiang Ming to the shore. Hu Ting and Zhang Tian, who were on the shore, looked at Jiang Ming and, seeing that he didn't need their help at all, couldn't help but give him a thumbs up. It must be said that Jiang Ming's vitality is truly tenacious. Jiang Ming's elf is really reliable. With this feeling, they once again turned their gaze to the water. Jiang Ming and the other trainers have been able to return to shore completely thanks to Blastoise's help, but those trainers are different. They had no one to help them, and with Jiang Ming and other elves on the shore, they were unable to return to the assassination site. The human body cannot remain submerged in water indefinitely. Unable to return to their seats and having been submerged for so long, they were clearly in poor condition. Such a poor condition naturally made things easier for Jiang Ming and his group. Zhang Tian, who already harbored resentment towards these trainers, proudly took out his Poké ball and looked at Jiang Ming. "Now all of Pokémon 933 are safe, we can act recklessly from now on." Jiang Ming was willing to agree with what he said. After all, he, like Zhang Tian, harbored resentment towards the trainers who had inexplicably hidden their tools and were now lurking in the shadows, attempting to attack them. So when Zhang Tian threw out the Poké ball, he didn't stop him at all but instead looked at the other trainers with a smile. Under his gaze, the other trainers also took out their Poké balls without hesitation and launched attacks on the group of trainers and Pokémon on the water. Jiang Ming stood calmly to the side, intending to wait until the trainers and Pokémon couldn't hold on any longer before taking action to arrest and interrogate these people, he said. But just then, a ripple suddenly appeared on the water. Zhang Tian is a very experienced trainer who sensed the danger around him almost immediately. He quickly grabbed Houghton next to him and retreated while the other trainers were still a bit confused. As soon as he finished retreating, he shouted to the trainers around him, "There's something in the water." It was clearly too late for those words. As he called out, something in the water suddenly appeared before everyone. It was a giant stinging jellyfish. The tentacruel was extremely powerful and the trainers around it were injured by its stinger before they could even react. By the time the surviving trainers realized what was happening, it was too late. Seeing their companion injured by the poison needles, they quickly began running towards him, trying to move him to a safe place. Fortunately, the transfer went very smoothly. It seemed the stinging jellyfish wasn't targeting them. So just as the trainers realized what was happening and moved their companions, the tentacruel swept directly towards the trainers and Pokémon on the water's surface. All the trainers felt a tremor and the surrounding water began to splash around them. By the time the trainers realized what was happening, their enemies were no longer on the water. They looked around with grim expressions. Seeing that the enemies on the water had disappeared and the stinging jellyfish had also vanished, they immediately understood who the stinging jellyfish had targeted this time. Understanding is one thing, but it doesn't mean they'll be happy. They'd been thoroughly tormented by those trainers in the water before, and now that they finally had a chance for revenge, they were just forced to watch helplessly as their enemies were taken away. It was a truly humiliating outcome. Feeling utterly humiliated, the group of trainers approached Jiang Ming with helpless expressions. Zhang Tian and Huo Ting also came to Jiang Ming's side, but compared to the other trainers who felt humiliated, Zhang Tian and Huo Ting had different thoughts. They had seen this tentacruel before, and they also knew that Jiang Ming seemed to have spent some time with the tentacruel's trainer. So rather than being angry, they wanted to learn more about the stinging jellyfish from Jiang Ming. With the intention of trying to understand, Zhang Tian and Huo Ting looked intently at Jiang Ming. Jiang Ming, who was being closely watched, was having a terrible headache. How could he possibly know anything about Tentacruel and its trainer? The other party had always treated him as an enemy. Although things did ease up somewhat afterward, it was only between two elves. He and the tentacruel trainer remain enemies. This hostile situation made both sides extra prepared for each other, and it was absolutely impossible for them to casually reveal their situation. Because they wouldn't express their opinions, Jiang's telegram to the other party was completely ineffective, let alone understanding what the other party was doing there. But whether he had thought about it or not, things had already turned out this way. After a moment of confusion, Jiang Ming quickly came to his senses and began to give instructions to the trainers around him. I don't know why that tentacruel suddenly appeared, but the most important thing right now is to heal the trainers and Pokémon around here. Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, the surrounding trainers finally realized what was happening and quickly looked at their companions. Seeing their companion still thrashing about on the ground from the stinger of the jellyfish, they were embarrassed and had no time to think about anything else. They quickly picked up their companion and ran towards the nearest hospital. Seeing that they had run away, Jiang Ming certainly wouldn't waste any more time as he still had a Gavob duck on his side. Because of the water, Jiang Ming couldn't take Golduck to the hospital, so he could only put Golduck back into its Piquet ball. Now that the battle is over, he should naturally treat Golduck and then ask about Golduck's plans. With this decision in mind, Jiang Ming glanced at Zhai Ting and Zhang Tian's attitudes but did not intend to explain too much to them at this time. Instead, he hurriedly took Golduck's Piquet ball and the Piquet balls of his other Pokémon and rushed to the hospital that could treat Pokémon. After a period of chaos, all the trainers who had landed on the island settled down in the hospital. Meanwhile, the spirits who had led them in battle in the water gradually appeared in the hospital for treatment. It was only at this moment that Jiang Ming calmly looked at the waiting guests and Zhang Tian, who were still waiting for him to speak, and helplessly spread his hands. I don't know why that stinging jellyfish appeared. Zhang Tian hesitated. They had all heard about the trainer of the tentacruel's attitude towards Jiang Ming. Therefore, they naturally knew that Jiang Ming's relationship with the tentacruel trainer wasn't that good. It's perfectly normal that Jiang Ming has no idea why the stinging jellyfish appears. Please give me flowers. Therefore, when Jiang Ming said these words, they were extremely understanding. But after understanding, they had some different thoughts. Although Jiang Ming didn't know why Tentacruel and its trainer had come here, he could become the unique individual who could fish out a Tentacruel. They could clearly see the other party's attitude towards Jiang Ming. Because he could see it clearly after hesitating for a while, Zhang Tian approached Jiang Ming with a fawning smile and said, "That trainer is already so powerful, yet he still has his eye on this place. That proves that what's under the island is very tempting. I wonder if you'd be interested in pulling off a big heist with me." Jiang Ming had already figured out Zhang Tian's thoughts while Zhang Tian was still pondering. Hearing him ask if he could pull off a big heist, Jiang Ming already had an idea in mind, but he didn't intend to show it on the surface. He lowered his head to ponder. Just then he heard a splashing sound of water beside him. Jiang Ming, who was pondering this, calmly looked towards the source of the sound and saw that Ji Ye and Haklong, two elite Song Dynasty soldiers, were fighting in the sanatorium water for some unknown reason. The two sprites who were fighting glared at each other angrily, seemingly quite displeased with some action of the other. After glaring at each other, the two launched direct attacks. Outside their attack range, a silly Magikarp was still hopping around nearby. This jump initially did not affect either party. However, after jumping for a long time, the two Pokémon that had been attacking each other must have gotten annoyed by Magikarp's jumping. Just as Jiang Ming was watching, the two Pokémon 670 suddenly turned all their attacks on Magikarp. The silly Magikarp didn't even dodge, taking the attacks from both sides head-on. Golduck and Dragonair weren't exactly bad-tempered Pokémon to begin with, but after inexplicably attacking Skipjack, the two Pokémon quickly felt guilty and stopped attacking each other. Jiang Ming, Zhang Tian, and Hu Ting, who were watching the two Pokémon, were speechless as they observed the three Pokémon interacting like children. After a while, they finally couldn't help but mutter a comment. The Magikarp is truly an innocent victim. Along with this sarcastic remark, Zhang Tian suddenly said with a bit of a strange feeling, "I've noticed that although Magikarp seems silly, it actually has a strong ability to make sarcastic remarks." As soon as Zhang Tian finished speaking, Huo Ting, who was still complaining about Magikarp, couldn't help but turn his gaze to Jiang Tian. Jiang Ming, who was watching the photos of Golduck and Hackerin, couldn't help but smile when he heard this. It seems that Jiang Tian has a very active mind. They can always find new ways to solve problems. He exhaled, suddenly snapping back to reality, and returned to his original position, looking at Jiang Tian. Magikarp is indeed a Pokémon very good at taunting other Pokémon. Jiang Tian smiled broadly at Jiang Ming's response, clearly indicating that Jiang Ming had some thoughts about what he had said earlier. Since that's the case, let's play too. Without any intention of being polite, Jiang Tian leaned close to Jiang Ming and asked with a grin, "Do you think we could lure it out if we used Magikarp to attract it?" As the king of taunts, Jiang Tian secretly felt that Magikarp could definitely help them attract the people they wanted to attract. But Magikarp is Jiang Ming's Pokémon, and since it's a shiny type, it's even more special. So even though he had this idea in his mind, he dared not express it directly to Jiang Ming. Therefore, he planned to lure Jiang Ming into saying those words. How could Jiang Ming, who was being lured by him, not see through his little trick? But Jiang Ming didn't say anything, he simply walked up to Magikarp. Despite being attacked for no apparent reason, Magikarp remained oblivious, lying idly in its hospital tank. It's clear that this elf is incredibly tough and isn't afraid of attacks at all. It was clear that Magikarp was not afraid of attacks at all. Jiang Ming raised his hand and stirred the water. Just as Magikarp started jumping because of his shove, Jiang Ming suddenly withdrew his hand and said to Jiang Tian beside him, "My Pokémon should be about to evolve as well." Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, Jiang Tian's eyes turned red. A shiny Magikarp isn't really that useful. After all, Magikarp is known for being useless. However, things will be quite different once Magikarp evolves into Gyarados. Gyarados has a very wide attack range, and its attack range is very wide. 3.8. A high-level or even very powerful Gyarados can even destroy a city. This type of Pokémon is extremely rare. Most trainers who want to catch Gyarados fail, and in the end, they choose to settle for raising Magikarp instead. However, Magikarp is a Pokémon that is inherently dull and slow-witted, so it's not easy to train it. There aren't many people who can train others for so long like Jiang Ming and still gain valuable experience from it. But guessing is really different from hearing it. If he misses out on this huge benefit, he really won't have many opportunities to find the next one. After the two people left completely, Jiang Ming and the doctor treated the remaining Pokémon and separated them from the water. After confirming that Magikarp would recover in about 2 or 3 days, Jiang Ming, Huo Ting, and Jiang Tian made an appointment to take Magikarp to the lake where the island was located 3 days later. Jiang Ming also wants to gain experience from this, which is a good thing for both of them. But what if there are truly great benefits hidden beneath the island? With this firm idea in mind, Jiang Ming made some other plans with Jiang Tian before sending Jiang Tian and the other person who had made reservations away. He only cares about profit. He came to the island because he thought there were some treasures there, which is why he chose to come here to search for them. I agree to your attraction plan, but I don't intend to use Dragonair to attract that Tentacruel. I want to use Magikarp to attract it. I want to take this opportunity to see if I can gamble on evolving Magikarp. Upon hearing Jiang Ming's words, Jiang Tian gasped. In fact, he had already guessed Jiang Ming's plan. Like most trainers, he probably didn't want to stay here after realizing that the birds were a huge problem. For the sake of his interests, Jiang Tian stood up firmly and nodded to Jiang Ming. Jiang Ming, who had already guessed that Jiang Tian would definitely agree, smiled and looked at Fu Ting. When everyone else chose to retreat, these two people actually advanced instead of retreating. Jiang Ming smiled when asked the question, and instead of beating around the bush, he went straight to him and asked directly. Having already seen through Huo Ting, Jiang Ming nodded to Huo Ting, then stopped talking nonsense and started walking towards the direction where Li Si was to check on the healing status of Magikarp. This feeling didn't last long. After all, he really wanted to know from Tentacruel's trainer what exactly was under that island. As a member of the minority, Jiang Tian understood that this was all due to Jiang Ming's own abilities, not Magikarp's. Caught in the middle, Huo Ting glanced at the two people and thought they were incredibly audacious. But when he thought about the power of the evolved shiny Magikarp, he felt he couldn't help but be envious. He was conflicted. He felt that these two people with the idea of high-stakes gambling were not on the same path as him, and he didn't have the ability to climb to a high position like them. However, Jiang Ming was different from Zhang Tian. Both of them had a gambling mentality. If any other trainer obtained such a skipjack Magnus, they certainly wouldn't have the ability to raise it to the point where it could evolve. When he actually heard Jiang Ming say that, he still felt that Jiang Ming was simply taking a huge gamble. Thinking of this, he clenched his fists and hesitated for a while under the gazes of the two people before finally standing up firmly. Since it's a good thing, he doesn't care even if Jiang Ming's plan is a bit shocking. Okay, there's only so much I can do, but I'll definitely escort you all on your mission. 014402422 Feilu 220,212,010. This person doesn't really want to gamble anymore but still can't resist the temptation. Later, when he discovered that he didn't have the ability to control certain things on the island, he actually started to consider retreating. It has to be said that finding him from the very beginning was a huge gamble. With red eyes, Zhang Tian stared at Jiang Ming for a long time before finally asking him with a hint of helplessness, "So what do you mean?" Jiang Ming smiled as he looked at Fu Ting, who had made a huge decision and was starting to get nervous. Since I couldn't resist the temptation, I had no choice but to go on the adventure with him. For the next few days, Jiang Ming rested at the hospital. On the third day after all the Pokémon had recovered, Jiang Ming, along with Hu Ting and Zhang Tian, headed to the lake where the island was located. Blastoises still exist on the lake. However, this Pokémon was probably quite afraid of the trainers around it, so when it saw Jiang Ming, Zhang Tian, and Chuang Ting coming over together, it didn't even need to greet Jiang Ming and turned around and ran away with its group of Wartortles. Jiang Ming, who had originally intended to greet Blastoise, watched it turn and run away with a grin, then helplessly shrugged. Just as Zhang Tian was getting a little nervous and hoping Jiang Ming would resolve the issue quickly, Jiang Ming casually released Magikarp. The released Magikarp was jumping around foolishly near the lake, clearly unaware that it had been used as bait by its trainer. Seeing the rather dull-witted Magikarp, Jai Tian and Hu Ting slowly decided to start observing from the sidelines. Meanwhile, Jiang Ming, along with Qiu Gui and Sainduo, kept a close eye on the water's surface. As time passed, just when Zhang Tian and Hu Ting thought they might not be able to catch any stinging jellyfish today, a ripple suddenly appeared on the surface of the water. As skilled trainers, both Jiang Ming and the trainers behind him could clearly sense that something was coming. Jiang Ming quickly grabbed his elf and began to retreat. As Jiang Ming retreated, because it was necessary to mention splashes of water. Fortunately, Jiang Ming, Zhang Tian, Huo Ting, and the trainers behind Huo Ting were all well prepared. Long before they started planning to lure the stinging jellyfish out, they had already prepared for the possibility that the stinging jellyfish would attack them as soon as they appeared. Therefore, all kinds of equipment are very complete. This completeness prevented the tentacles jellyfish's first wave of attacks from succeeding. The stinger and spray from the jellyfish didn't land on anyone. Instead, they were blocked by the purchased props. Meanwhile, a group of trainers who were using items to block the attack were huddled securely inside the items, clearly aware of just how dangerous Tentacruel could be. The stinging jellyfish, which suddenly appeared on the water's surface, never expected that its attack would be blocked. Seeing that the people had come prepared, the stinging jellyfish let out a dissatisfied cry and then suddenly launched another attack towards the shore. Jiang Ming, hiding nearby, watched as the Tentacruel's attack was exceptionally swift this time, and naturally did not intend to let Magikarp continue jumping on the surface of the water. Although he released Magikarp to attract Tentacruel, it doesn't mean he'll just let Magikarp get hurt there. Now that the goal of attracting the Tentacruel has been achieved, the next step is naturally to put away the Magikarp. Jiang Ming, having made this decision, recalled Magikarp while addressing the group of trainers beside him. "Why aren't you attacking yet?" Those trainers weren't stupid, they were prepared to attack from the moment they arrived. Hearing Jiang Ming's words, they who were already prepared immediately took out their best Pokémon that could fight on water. Among these Pokémon, Zhang Tian and Futing's Pokémon make up the largest proportion. 14,402,422, Feilu 220,212,250. The two spirits led the way, launching a fierce attack on the stinging jellyfish. The Tentacruel, caught off guard by the sudden attack, clearly hadn't expected such a group of Pokémon to appear, especially since its attention had been diverted by a group of trainers earlier. Its attack power is starting to weaken. Taking advantage of the moment when the opponent's attack power was weakened, Jiang Ming quickly tried to recall Magikarp into its Piquet ball. Unfortunately, Magikarp was quite far away from him, and the Pokémon was unusually active, still jumping around recklessly even after it had already jumped right next to Tentacruel. Unable to retrieve Magikarp from its Piquet ball through any means, Jiang Ming looked at the oblivious Pokémon with a headache.
Hello, everyone! As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500-plus novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.